The conference room exploded with laughter as executives mocked the man in coveralls kneeling beside an electrical panel. "Security! Get this maintenance guy out of here before he breaks something!" Vice President Marcus Chen's voice dripped with contempt. But the quiet man didn't flinch. He simply placed one more handwritten calculation on the mahogany table, a correction that would either save $1 billion military contract or expose the catastrophic flaw that could kill soldiers overseas. Only one person in that room knew the truth. The maintenance guy owned the entire building. Before we dive into this story, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. Now, let's begin. The fluorescent lights in Orion Dynamics' basement service corridor buzzed like angry wasps. Ethan Calloway squinted at the electrical schematic spread across a makeshift workbench, really just a sheet of plywood balanced on two filing cabinets someone had abandoned down here years ago. His hands, calloused despite the billions in his bank account, traced the circuit pathways with the kind of intimacy most men his age reserved for sports cars or lovers. "This is wrong," he muttered. Not to anyone in particular, just to the empty hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner and old copper wiring. Upstairs, 3 floors above his head, Orion's executive team was probably already gathering in the North Conference Room. Expensive suits, catered breakfast, PowerPoint presentations polished until they reflected nothing but confidence and projected revenue. In exactly 47 minutes, representatives from the Department of Defense would walk through those pristine glass doors expecting to see the future of military infrastructure. What they'd actually see was a disaster waiting to happen. Ethan had discovered the problem at 3:17 that morning. He'd been home, trying to help Mason with a school project about electrical circuits. The irony wasn't lost on him, when his son had asked a simple question. "Dad, what happens if you put too much electricity through one of these?" The answer had hit him like a freight train. He'd driven to the office in his 10-year-old Toyota, the one with the cracked windshield he kept meaning to replace, and descended into the technical archives where the original infrastructure calculations were stored. Orion Dynamics didn't just design energy systems. They built the invisible networks that kept military bases operational in the worst conditions Earth could throw at them. Desert heat that melted asphalt, Arctic cold that froze diesel fuel solid, combat zones where a single point of failure meant people died. The proposal his executive team planned to present in less than an hour contained a load distribution error that would turn catastrophic somewhere around 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Not a problem in Chicago, potentially fatal in places like Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, where summer temperatures regularly hit 120. Ethan had run the numbers 4 times, then 6, then 10. Every calculation confirmed the same nightmare. An 11% load instability that conventional testing would never catch, because nobody thought to simulate sustained extreme heat combined with maximum tactical power draw. His executives hadn't caught it because none of them had actually served in those environments. They'd never stood in a forward operating base watching generators struggle against heat that made breathing feel like drowning. They'd never seen what happened when critical systems failed during combat operations. Ethan had. A long time ago, in a version of his life he rarely discussed, he rolled up the corrected schematics and headed for the stairs. The elevator would be faster, but elevators had cameras, and he wasn't ready for anyone to know he'd been here all night. Wasn't ready for the questions about why the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation was doing grunt work in the basement at dawn. The truth was simple and complicated at the same time, because someone had to. Because the people who'd created this proposal were brilliant in boardrooms and useless in the field. Because Ethan had built his entire fortune on one principle: systems only worked when someone actually understood them from the ground up. The stairwell door closed behind him with a metallic clang that echoed all the way up. Chites. Lena Hart's day had started the way most of her days started lately. Badly. The bus had been late, forcing her to sprint the last 4 blocks to Orion Dynamics in shoes that had stopped providing actual support somewhere around last November. Her supervisor, a woman named Patricia, who seemed to take personal offense at poverty, had been waiting with crossed arms and a watch she'd made a point of checking. "You're 12 minutes late, Lena." "The bus? I don't pay you to tell me about public transportation problems. I pay you to clean." Except Patricia didn't pay her anything. The temp agency did, and they paid barely enough to qualify as minimum wage once you factored in that they didn't offer benefits, sick days, or anything resembling job security. Lena had swallowed the argument forming in her throat and nodded, picked up her cart loaded with industrial cleaner, rags, and the kind of cheap paper towels that disintegrated if you looked at them wrong. Started her rounds on the third floor while the building was still mostly empty. She'd been doing this for 8 months now, ever since Mom's diagnosis had turned their already precarious financial situation into something resembling freefall. The hospital bills alone were crushing, the medications cost more than rent, and the temp agency kept promising a permanent position that never quite materialized. But it was something. It kept the lights on, kept food in the apartment, kept Mom's prescriptions filled, even if Lena had to skip meals some days to make the math work. The third floor of Orion Dynamics was executive territory. Thick carpets that muffled footsteps, original art on the walls, actual paintings, not prints. Conference rooms with names like Innovation Hub and Strategic Vision Center that made Lena wonder if people actually said those names out loud with straight faces. She was wiping down the glass walls of Conference Room B when she noticed someone had left papers scattered across the table inside. Unusual. The executives were normally paranoid about confidential information. They had shredders everywhere and signs reminding people that corporate espionage was a federal crime. Lena hesitated, then used her master key to slip inside. Just to tidy up, just to do her job. The papers were covered in handwriting. Not typed documents or printed reports, but actual handwritten calculations. Numbers and symbols Lena didn't understand, flowing across the pages in neat columns that suggested whoever had written them knew exactly what they were doing. At the bottom of one page, someone had written in capital letters, "Critical error, thermal load failure, under sustained extreme conditions." Lena didn't have an engineering degree, hadn't even finished college. She dropped out when Mom got sick and the tuition money had to become medical money. But she understood enough to know that critical error and failure in the same sentence probably wasn't good. She was still staring at the papers when the door opened behind her. Lena jumped, spinning around, already forming an apology. The man who entered wasn't wearing a suit. He had on canvas work pants and a gray Henley that had seen better days. Boots that actually looked used, not the designer kind executives wore to pretend they understood manual labor. He was carrying a cardboard tube, the kind architects used for blueprints, and he stopped short when he saw her. "Sorry," Lena said immediately. "I was just cleaning. These papers were here, and I wanted to make sure they didn't get damaged or—" "It's fine." His voice was quiet, calm. He set the tube down on the table and looked at the scattered calculations. "Did you read any of this?" "I can't read it. I don't understand engineering stuff." He nodded slowly, picked up one of the pages and studied it like he was seeing it for the first time, even though the handwriting was clearly his. "But you saw the error note. It wasn't a question." Lena nodded anyway. "You work here?" he asked. "Cleaning. Third shift usually, but they needed someone for the day crew, so—" She trailed off, suddenly aware she was explaining her life to a stranger who probably didn't care. But he was listening, actually listening, in a way people rarely did when they found out you cleaned buildings for a living. "I'm Ethan," he said. "Lena." "Well, Lena, you've got good instincts." He gathered the papers into a neat stack. "These calculations are about to become very important, and most of the people upstairs don't want to hear it." "Why not?" "Because fixing the problem means delaying a very expensive contract, and delay means someone might lose money." He said it matter-of-factly, without anger or judgment, just stating reality. Money tends to matter more than being right. Lena knew that truth intimately, had lived it every day since Mom got sick and discovered that insurance companies would rather save money than save lives. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were tired. Not sleepy tired, but the deeper kind of exhaustion that came from carrying weight nobody else could see. "I'm going to walk into that presentation," he said, "and tell them the truth. And they're going to think I'm crazy." He picked up the cardboard tube. "You might want to finish cleaning in here quickly. Things are probably about to get loud." He left before Lena could ask what he meant. She stood alone in the conference room, surrounded by glass walls and expensive furniture and the lingering smell of industrial cleaner, wondering what kind of person walked calmly toward disaster with nothing but handwritten calculations and a cardboard tube full of blueprints. Marcus Chen was holding court when Ethan arrived. The vice president of strategic contracts stood at the head of the North Conference Room table, one hand resting on a leather portfolio that probably cost more than Lena made in 6 months. Around him sat the usual collection of senior executives: Jennifer Watts from engineering, Thomas Bradshaw from finance, David Park, who ran government relations. All of them had their laptops open. All of them wore confidence like expensive cologne. The Department of Defense representatives weren't due for another 20 minutes, but the team was clearly rehearsing, running through talking points, making sure everyone knew their lines. Ethan walked in through the side door. Marcus noticed him first, did a double take that would have been funny under different circumstances. "Can I help you?" Marcus's tone suggested the answer should be no. "We have a problem with the thermal load specifications," Ethan said. He set the cardboard tube on the table and started unrolling the blueprints. "I'm sorry, who are you?" This from Jennifer Watts, peering at him over designer glasses that probably had fake lenses because everyone knew she'd gotten corrective surgery last year. "Someone who actually understands the systems you're about to sell." Thomas Bradshaw laughed. Actually laughed, like Ethan had told a joke. "Security is getting really lax if maintenance guys can just wander into executive briefings." "I'm not maintenance," Ethan said quietly. He spread the corrected calculations across the table, right on top of their pristine presentation materials. "And this proposal has a critical flaw that will cause catastrophic failure in sustained temperatures above 115 degrees. Marcus's face had progressed through several shades of red. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to leave, now, before I have security remove you." "Look at the calculations." "I don't need to look at anything. I need you out of my conference room." Jennifer Watts had actually picked up one of the pages. She squinted at the numbers, frowning. "Marcus, maybe we should..." "Should what? Take engineering advice from someone who wandered in off the street?" Marcus was on his feet now. "David, call security." "The load distribution is wrong," Ethan said, his voice still level despite the rising chaos. "You're calculating based on standard operating temperatures, but military installations in the Middle East regularly exceed those parameters. When you combine extreme heat with maximum tactical power draw..." "I've heard enough." Marcus jabbed a finger toward the door. "Out, before this becomes a police matter." "People could die." "The only thing dying here is your credibility." Marcus had his phone out now, actually dialing. "Yes, this is VP Chen. I need security to Conference Room North immediately. We have an unauthorized individual who's..." The door opened. 2 security guards entered, hands already moving toward the equipment on their belts. Behind them, Lena stood frozen in the doorway, her cleaning cart blocking the entrance. She must have heard the commotion, must have come to see what was happening. Her eyes met Ethan's across the room. He saw the question there. "Should I say something? Should I tell them?" Ethan gave the smallest shake of his head. "Not yet. Not like this." "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us," one of the security guards said. Young guy, probably ex-military based on his posture, trying to be respectful despite the situation. "I understand," Ethan said. He started gathering his papers. "Leave those," Marcus snapped. "Whatever corporate espionage operation you're running, those documents stay here as evidence." "They're not espionage, they're corrections to your proposal." "Right. And I'm sure you're going to tell me you're actually an electrical engineer with decades of military experience." Marcus's sarcasm could have cut glass. Ethan paused, looked at the executive team arrayed around the table like judges at a trial, looked at the security guards waiting to escort him out, looked at Lena standing in the doorway with her cart and her worn shoes and her eyes that had already seen too much struggle to waste time on lies. "Actually," Ethan said quietly, "I designed most of the systems your proposal is based on. About 8 years ago, before I inherited this company from my father and restructured it into what you're all currently working for." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus recovered first. "That's the most pathetic story I've ever heard. Do you have any idea who actually owns Orion Dynamics?" Ethan Calloway is one of the most successful defense contractors in the country. He's 32 years old, worth billions, and he definitely doesn't wander around his own building dressed like... He gestured dismissively at Ethan's work clothes. "That." "Check my ID," Ethan said to the security guard. "It should be in your system." The guard hesitated, looked at his partner, then, moving carefully, pulled out his radio and called down to the main security desk. Yeah, need an ID verification. Male, early 30s, says his name is. He looked at Ethan. Ethan Calloway. The guard repeated it into the radio. Waited. The response came back tinny, but clear enough for everyone in the room to hear. Ethan Calloway, CEO, full building access, photo match from last year's security update. Every executive's laptop was suddenly very interesting. Thomas Bradshaw had gone pale. Jennifer Watts looked like she was trying to remember if she had a current resume. David Park just stared at the table, probably calculating how many employment lawyers he could afford. Marcus Chen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Mr. Calloway, you never mentioned you were coming to the presentation. I wasn't planning to. Ethan gathered his corrected calculations into a neat pile. I was planning to fix the problem quietly and move on. But since you've now involved security and threatened me with police action, I think we should table this presentation until the thermal load issue is resolved. The DoD representatives will be here in 15 minutes, Jennifer said weakly. Then you'll reschedule. We've been preparing for this for 6 months. The contract is worth $1.2 billion over 3 years. If we delay, Titan Defense Systems will present a proposal that either has the same flaw we have or doesn't have it because their engineers actually did the stress testing. Ethan cut her off, his patience clearly wearing thin. Either way, I'm not putting my name on a system that could fail during combat operations. Your name? Marcus had found his voice again, along with what sounded like the beginnings of indignation. With respect, Mr. Calloway, this proposal was developed by our engineering team over 6 months. Your name isn't on it. My company's name is. That's enough. But surely we can present the current version and make corrections during the implementation phase. These kinds of technical adjustments happen all the time after contracts are awarded. Ethan looked at Marcus for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but something in it made everyone in the room go still. 6 years ago, I spent 4 months at a forward operating base in Helmand Province. Technically, I was there as a civilian contractor, but there's not much civilian about a place where people are actively trying to kill you. He paused. We had a power distribution failure during a coordinated attack. Temperature was 118 degrees. The backup systems that were supposed to activate didn't, because someone had made a calculation error almost exactly like the one in your proposal. We lost communications, lost defensive capabilities, and spent 6 hours essentially blind while taking fire. The room was silent. 3 people died that night who might not have if the systems had worked correctly. One of them was a 23-year-old kid from Ohio who'd been in country for 5 weeks. Ethan's hands were steady as he rolled up his blueprints. So, no, Marcus, we're not going to present a flawed proposal and fix it later. We're going to fix it now, present it correctly, or not present it at all. The board will... I am the board's largest shareholder. This discussion is over. Ethan turned to the security guards. Sorry for the confusion, gentlemen. They nodded, already backing toward the door, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. Ethan walked out, leaving the executives in frozen silence. Lena had moved her cart out of the doorway, but she was still there in the hallway, pretending to wipe down a glass partition that was already spotless. Ethan paused next to her. Thank you, he said quietly, for not saying anything. I didn't know what to say. Most people would have said something anyway. He glanced back toward the conference room where his executives were probably having collective panic attacks. You heading home after your shift? Yeah, my mom has a doctor's appointment at 3, so I need to... She stopped, suddenly aware she was oversharing again. I hope it goes well, Ethan said. And from the way he said it, she believed he actually meant it. He headed for the elevators, leaving Lena alone with her cart and her thoughts, and the growing certainty that she'd just witnessed something that would probably get her fired if anyone thought she'd been involved. Through the glass wall, she could see Marcus Chen on his phone, pacing like a caged animal. The other executives huddled around their laptops, probably already drafting resignation letters or explanations or whatever people did when they accidentally tried to throw their own CEO out of a meeting. Lena went back to cleaning, because that's what you did when you couldn't afford to lose a job, even a terrible one. You put your head down and kept working and pretended the chaos swirling around you was someone else's problem. But she couldn't stop thinking about the quiet man in work clothes who'd calmly explained that people might die and then walked away when no one would listen. Osag, The rest of Lena's shift passed in a blur of bathrooms that didn't need cleaning and conference rooms full of people having urgent, whispered conversations. By 2:30, she was done, clocking out at the service entrance where the temp workers gathered. Patricia caught her on the way out. Did something happen on 3 today? Lena's heart rate kicked up. Like what? Like security getting called to a conference room, like executive assistants running around making calls. Patricia's eyes narrowed. You didn't see anything unusual? I was cleaning. I don't really pay attention to... Lena trailed off, trying to look appropriately confused and disinterested. Patricia studied her for another few seconds, then waved her off. Fine. You're scheduled for evening shift tomorrow. Don't be late. Lena escaped to the bus stop, grateful for the cold air and the distance from Orion Dynamics, and the feeling that she'd somehow gotten tangled up in something way beyond her pay grade. The doctor's appointment went about as well as they ever did. More tests, more medications that insurance might or might not cover. More polite suggestions from the oncologist about advanced care planning, which was medical speak for start thinking about end-of-life decisions. Mom was tired on the way home, slept against the bus window while Lena watched the city scroll past and tried not to think about bills or prognosis or the fact that she was 30 years old and her entire life had narrowed down to this: work, hospital, sleep, repeat. Back at their apartment, a one-bedroom in a building that charitably could be called vintage, and more accurately described as should probably be condemned, Lena got Mom settled on the couch with tea and the cooking shows she liked to watch. You look exhausted, honey, Mom said, which was rich coming from someone who'd just had poison pumped into her veins for 6 hours. I'm fine. Lena. That one word, spoken in the tone mothers mastered somewhere around their child's 3rd birthday, carried enough weight to stop arguments before they started. Work was just weird today, Lena admitted. She sat down on the couch arm, too wired to actually settle. There was this thing with executives and security, and I sort of accidentally ended up in the middle of it. Are you in trouble? No, I don't think so. Maybe? Lena rubbed her eyes. There was this guy. He tried to warn them about a problem with some project, and they treated him like he was nobody, called security on him. The whole thing was... She searched for the right word. Sad. He was just trying to help, and they couldn't see past his clothes or whatever to realize he might actually know what he was talking about. What happened? Turned out he owned the whole company. Mom actually laughed at that, a real laugh, the kind Lena hadn't heard in weeks. I bet those executives felt pretty stupid. You have no idea. They sat quietly for a while, the television providing comfortable background noise. Then Mom said, You know what I miss? Meeting people like that. People who aren't what they seem. Your father was like that when I first met him. Lena had heard this story before, but she didn't interrupt. Mom didn't talk about Dad much anymore. Showed up at the restaurant where I was waitressing, wearing this terrible suit that didn't fit right. I thought he was another struggling salesman trying to impress a date with money he didn't have. Mom smiled at the memory. Turned out he was a lawyer who'd just made partner. Hated wearing suits, but did it for work. The terrible fit was because he'd rather spend money on books than tailoring. I remember his library, Lena said softly. He would have liked your billionaire janitor. He wasn't a janitor, and I don't think he's my anything. Still, your dad always said you could tell a lot about people by what they did when they thought nobody was watching. If this man of yours spends his time trying to fix problems nobody else sees, he's not my man, Mom. Then he's probably worth knowing. Lena didn't argue, just sat with her mother in their falling-apart apartment, watching cooking shows and trying not to think about thermal load calculations or quiet men with tired eyes or the feeling that her life had just shifted slightly off its axis in a way she couldn't quite name. At the same time, across the city in a penthouse that offered views most people only saw in architecture magazines, Ethan Calloway was eating cold pizza and helping his 8-year-old son with homework. Dad, what's a metaphor again? Mason squinted at his English worksheet like it might suddenly make sense through sheer force of will. It's when you describe something by comparing it to something else. Like saying someone has a heart of stone. Do people actually have hearts made of rocks? Nobody. It means they're cold, unfeeling. Mason thought about this. That's dumb. Why not just say they're mean? Because sometimes the comparison makes it more interesting. Ethan picked a piece of pepperoni off his pizza slice. More vivid. I still think it's dumb. Hard to argue with that logic. They worked through the rest of the worksheet in companionable silence. Mason had his mother's concentration. The way he'd scrunch his nose when he was thinking hard. The way he'd drum his pencil against the table without realizing he was doing it. Sarah had been gone for 3 years, but the echoes of her were everywhere. In their son's gestures. In the photos, Ethan still couldn't quite bring himself to pack away. In the empty side of the bed that he'd eventually stopped making excuses for. All done, Mason announced, shoving the worksheet across the table. Can I draw now? Homework done? Yes. All of it? Mason hesitated. Maybe there's math? Maybe do that first. Mason dragged out the sound like it might change Ethan's mind. Math first, then drawing. Mason grumbled but pulled out his math book. Ethan took the opportunity to check his phone, which had been vibrating with increasing urgency for the past hour. 17 missed calls, 32 emails, all from Orion executives who'd apparently recovered from their shock enough to start damage control. Marcus Chen's latest email was a masterpiece of corporate apology. Mr. Calloway, I cannot adequately express my regret for this morning's misunderstanding. I take full responsibility for failing to recognize you and will, of course, submit my resignation effective immediately. Ethan deleted it, deleted most of the others too, until he found one from Jennifer Watts that was mercifully brief. Thermal calculations being reviewed by independent consultant. We'll have full report by tomorrow morning. We're rescheduling the DoD presentation for next week. JW. That was more like it. Actual work instead of performative groveling. He sent back a simple reply. Good. Let me know what the consultant finds. Dad, what's 6 times 8? What do you think it is? Mason made a face. If I knew, I wouldn't ask. Try breaking it down. What's 6 times 4? 24. Good. So what's 24 times 2? Mason's face scrunched in concentration. 48? There you go. 6 times 8 is 48. That's a dumb way to do it. But you got the answer, didn't you? Mason conceded the point with a grumble and went back to his worksheet. Ethan watched him work, feeling the familiar mix of pride and terror that seemed to define single parenthood. Pride that this kid existed, that he was smart and funny and mostly kind. Terror that Ethan was somehow going to screw it up, that one wrong move would damage something essential and irreparable. Sarah had been the good parent, the patient one, the one who knew instinctively how to handle tears and tantrums and the 1,000 small crises of childhood. Ethan had learned through desperation and repetition, through mistakes and apologies and the gradual understanding that perfection wasn't possible, but presence was. Done, Mason announced again, this time with more certainty. Ethan checked the worksheet. All correct. Nice job, buddy. Go grab your drawing stuff. Mason disappeared into his room and returned with a battered sketchbook and a box of crayons that had definitely seen better days. He settled on the floor, already lost in whatever world existed in his head, and started drawing. Ethan watched him for a moment, then got up and walked to the window. Chicago sprawled below, all lights and geometry. From up here, it looked clean, orderly, like a place where things made sense and problems had solutions. From down there, Ethan knew it was messier. More complicated, full of people like Lena Hart working terrible jobs and riding broken buses and trying to keep their families alive on wages that barely qualified as currency. He thought about her eyes when she'd looked at those calculations. The way she'd understood immediately that something was wrong, even if she couldn't read the math. The way she'd kept his secret when any sane person would have spoken up, maybe earned some goodwill with the executives. Most people Ethan met wanted something. Money, access. The social capital that came from knowing someone successful. It was transactional and exhausting and had taught him to keep his distance. Lena had wanted nothing except to not get fired for being in the wrong conference room at the wrong time. It was refreshing, disarming, dangerous maybe. Dad, look! Mason held up his sketchbook. Ethan returned to the table. The drawing showed 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, standing next to something that might have been a building or possibly a very geometrical tree. That's us, Mason explained. At your work. Good job, buddy. Can I come to your work sometime, for real? Maybe. Ethan ruffled his son's hair. But it's pretty boring. Lots of meetings and computers. You always say that, but then you come home and tell me about cool stuff like electrical systems and energy grids and how buildings stay powered during storms. That's the interesting part. But most of my day is people talking about money. Mason wrinkled his nose. That does sound boring. Very boring. They sat together while Mason added more details to his drawing. Cars on a road, clouds in the sky, birds that looked more like flying potatoes. Normal kid stuff that felt like medicine after the day Ethan had had. His phone vibrated again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. Usually he let those go to voicemail, but something made him answer. Mr. Calloway? A woman's voice, professional but warm. This is Diane Rodriguez from the Department of Defense Contract Review Office. I understand there's been a delay in tomorrow's presentation? That's correct. We discovered a technical issue that needs to be resolved before we can proceed. I see. A pause. Can you tell me what kind of issue? Ethan walked back to the window, lowering his voice so Mason wouldn't hear. Thermal load distribution error. Would cause system failure in sustained high-temperature environments. How sustained? Anything over 115 degrees for more than 6 hours under maximum load. Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Calloway, are you telling me that your team was about to present a proposal with a flaw that could compromise operations in Middle Eastern installations? No, I'm telling you, my team didn't catch it, but I did. We're fixing it now. I'm going to need a full technical report. You'll have it by Friday. Good. Her voice softened slightly. Between you and me, we appreciate the honesty. We've had contractors present flawed systems before, and it never ends well when we discover the problems after implementation. I know. Yes, Diane said quietly. I've read your service record, Mr. Calloway. I know you know. They ended the call. Ethan stood at the window, phone in hand, trying to figure out if he'd just saved his company's reputation or destroyed it. Behind him, Mason was humming something tunelessly while he drew, the sound of childhood contentment, oblivious to adult complexities. Ethan envied that sometimes. The ability to exist in the moment without the weight of past mistakes or future consequences pressing down like atmospheric pressure. But then again, Mason had lost his mother at 5, had learned about grief and absence before most kids learned to tie their shoes. He carried his own weight, just differently. They all did. All of them, from billionaire CEOs to cleaning women to 8-year-old boys with crayon-stained fingers, moving through their days carrying invisible burdens and hoping the systems that kept them upright wouldn't fail at the worst possible moment. Ethan turned away from the window and sat back down at the table. What are you drawing now? He asked. Mason showed him a new page. 3 stick figures this time. 2 tall, 1 small. Who's that? Ethan pointed at the new figure. I don't know yet, Mason said, but you look sad when it's just the 2 of us. So I'm drawing 3. Ethan's throat tightened. Maybe you'll meet someone, Mason continued, completely unaware of the emotional grenade he'd just lobbed. Like in the movies, and then we'd be 3 instead of 2. Buddy, life isn't like the movies. I know. Movies are shorter and they play music, so you know when something important is happening. Mason added hair to the mystery figure. Long hair, he decided. But sometimes real life has the same stuff, just slower and without the music. Ethan looked at his son, this small person who somehow contained depths of wisdom wrapped in 8-year-old logic, and felt the familiar ache of love mixed with loss, mixed with hope, that maybe, eventually, things could be different. Maybe, he said quietly. Stranger things have happened. Mason smiled and went back to his drawing, adding a sun and more of those potato birds, filling the page with color and life, and the possibility of 3 instead of 2. The independent consultant's report landed on Ethan's desk at 6:47 the next morning. He'd been awake since 5, running on coffee and the kind of nervous energy that came from knowing you were right but hoping you were wrong. The report was 63 pages of technical analysis that boiled down to one conclusion. Ethan's calculations were correct. The thermal load distribution error was real, catastrophic, and had somehow slipped past 3 levels of engineering review. Jennifer Watts called at 7. You were right, she said without preamble. The consultant confirmed everything. We're looking at complete system failure at 117 degrees under sustained maximum load. I know. How did we miss this? She sounded genuinely shaken. We had our best engineers on this proposal for 6 months. Because your best engineers have never worked in 117-degree heat while people were shooting at them, Ethan said, more gently than he felt. They ran the calculations based on standard parameters. Nobody thought to stress test for extreme sustained conditions. Except you. Except me. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. Marcus submitted his resignation last night. I know, I rejected it. You what? He's a good VP, made a mistake, but who hasn't? Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching dawn break over Chicago through his home office window. Tell him to stop being dramatic and get back to work. We have a contract to fix. He called you a fraud in front of the entire executive team. He didn't know who I was. Honest mistake. Ethan paused. Though maybe suggest he actually meet the people who work in his building. The fact that nobody recognized their own CEO is kind of embarrassing for everyone involved. Jennifer laughed, surprised. I'll pass that along. What's our timeline? 2 weeks to rebuild the proposal. I'll work with engineering directly on the thermal specifications. The DoD is getting impatient. The DoD will be a lot more impatient if we install faulty systems that get their people killed, Ethan said flatly. 2 weeks, Jennifer. We do this right, or we don't do it at all. After they hung up, Ethan sat in the quiet office and let himself feel tired. Not just physically tired, though he definitely was that. Tired of being the only person in the room who seemed to understand that numbers on paper translated to real human consequences. Tired of fighting for basic competence from people who should know better. Tired of being alone in it. His phone buzzed. Text from Mason's school. Parent-teacher conference requested. Please contact office to schedule. Great. That was either very good or very bad. And given Mason's recent experiment with improving the class hamster's cage using what he described as advanced engineering principles, Ethan was betting on bad. He texted back to confirm, added the conference to his calendar, and tried not to think about all the ways he was probably failing as a parent while simultaneously trying to keep a multi-billion-dollar company from imploding. The apartment felt too quiet after Mason left for school. Too clean, too organized, too much like the set of a life rather than actual living. Ethan had hired a housekeeper after Sarah died, partly because he couldn't handle the domestic logistics alone, and partly because coming home to mess felt worse than coming home to sterile perfection. Now he wondered if that had been a mistake. If maybe a little mess would have made the place feel more like theirs and less like a museum exhibit titled Wealthy Single Father Tries His Best. His phone rang again. Unknown number, different from yesterday. Mr. Calloway? A man's voice this time, rough around the edges. This is Jerry Bishop. I'm a shift supervisor in your thermal systems division. Ethan sat up straighter. What can I do for you, Jerry? Well, sir, it's more what I can do for you. I heard through the grapevine about the load distribution issue. He paused. I worked on the original systems you designed back in 18, the ones for the FOBs in Afghanistan, and I think I know why the new calculations went wrong. I'm listening. The engineering team used the updated IEEE standards from 2023. Makes sense, right? Use the most current specifications. Jerry's voice carried the particular weariness of someone who'd seen this movie before. But those standards assume modern climate control is available. They don't account for installations where HVAC systems might be compromised or running at reduced capacity to save generator load. Which is exactly what happens in combat zones, Ethan said slowly. Exactly. The old standards we used in 18 had built-in assumptions about degraded operating conditions. The new ones are more efficient on paper but less robust in practice. Ethan was already pulling up the relevant specifications on his laptop. Jerry, how fast can you put together a comparison analysis? Already did. Been working on it since I heard about the problem yesterday. Can you receive encrypted email? Yes. Sending it now. The file came through 30 seconds later. Ethan opened it and felt something in his chest unclench slightly. Jerry had done exactly what was needed, a clear, methodical breakdown of where the specifications diverged and why it mattered. This is excellent work, Ethan said. How long have you been with Orion? 14 years, started as a junior technician right out of trade school. And you remember the 18 systems? I helped install 3 of them. Spent 4 months in Kandahar getting them operational. Jerry's voice shifted. Lost a buddy during one of those installations. Mortar attack took out our temporary power, and he was up on a ladder when the backup failed to kick in fast enough. Fell 3 stories. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. A pause. Point is, I take this stuff personally. Those systems keep people alive, can't cut corners. Ethan looked at Jerry's analysis on his screen, then at the consultant's report, then out the window at the city waking up beneath him. How would you like to lead the thermal system's redesign? Silence on the other end. Jerry? Sir, I'm a shift supervisor. I don't have an engineering degree. The exec team would never pitch it. The exec team just tried to present a proposal that would have gotten people killed, Ethan interrupted. You know these systems better than anyone. You've actually installed them in the field. That's worth more than a dozen degrees from people who've never left climate-controlled offices. I don't know what to say. Say yes. I'll have HR draw up the new position by end of day. You'll report directly to me during the redesign phase, then we'll figure out where you fit permanently. Ethan was already typing notes. Fair warning, you'll be working insane hours for the next 2 weeks, and some of the engineers are going to resent taking direction from someone they see as beneath them. Jerry laughed, sharp and surprised. Sir, I've been resented by better people than them. I can handle it. Good. First team meeting is tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., Conference Room North. After the call ended, Ethan sat back and allowed himself a moment of something that might have been hope. Maybe this wouldn't be a complete disaster. Maybe surrounding himself with people who actually understood the work instead of just managing it would make a difference. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Lena Hart. Patricia gave me your assistant's contact info and said to reach out about the incident yesterday. I'm not in trouble, am I? Ethan frowned. He didn't have an assistant, hadn't had one since his last EA quit after he refused to fire an entire department to improve quarterly numbers. He texted back, I don't have an assistant. Who gave you this number? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Oh no. Patricia said this was the official channel for reporting workplace incidents. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to bother you directly. You're not bothering me, but I'm curious what incident you're supposed to be reporting. The thing with the conference room? Security getting called? Patricia said there was going to be an investigation, and I needed to provide a statement. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. Patricia, whoever she was apparently trying to get Lena to incriminate herself or create a paper trail that could be used to fire her quietly. Classic corporate liability management. Get rid of the witness before she became a problem. He typed, There's no investigation. You didn't do anything wrong. But I'd like to talk to you if you have time. Are you working today? Evening shift, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Can you come in early? Say 4 p.m.? Long pause. Am I getting fired? No. Opposite of that, actually. I have a question for you. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before her response came through. Okay, where should I go? Main lobby. I'll meet you there. Ethan spent the rest of the morning doing actual CEO work, reviewing budgets, approving contracts, sitting through a video call with investors who wanted to know why the DoD presentation had been postponed. He gave them the sanitized version. Technical review required. Better to delay than present substandard work. Contract still secure. They seemed satisfied, or at least they stopped asking questions. At 3:30, he left the penthouse and drove to Orion in the Toyota. The security guard in the parking garage did a visible double take when Ethan pulled into a regular spot instead of the reserved executive section. Mr. Calloway, your spot is... I know where my spot is, Mike. I'm parking here today. Mike looked like he wanted to argue, but apparently thought better of it. Yes, sir. The main lobby was mostly empty at 4 o'clock. Too late for day shift, too early for evening. Ethan sat in one of the uncomfortable modern chairs that looked great in architecture photos and felt like sitting on geometric rocks, and waited. Lena arrived at 3:58, slightly out of breath like she'd been running. She was wearing the same worn jacket from yesterday, same practical shoes that had given up on arch support. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that was starting to come loose. She saw him and stopped, uncertain. Ethan stood. Thanks for coming early. I thought you'd be in your office. I was going to tell the receptionist. She gestured vaguely at the empty reception desk. Receptionist leaves at 3. and my office makes people nervous. He nodded toward the door. Want to take a walk? A walk? Yeah. Around the building. Fresh air. Easier to talk. Lena looked at him like he'd suggested they go skydiving. You want to take a walk with me? Is that weird? That's probably weird. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. I spend too much time in conference rooms. Makes me forget how to interact like a normal person. A smile flickered across her face. Okay, we can walk. They exited through the main doors into late afternoon sunlight that was trying hard to warm up October air. Chicago was preparing for winter, that in-between time when you needed a jacket but weren't quite ready to admit it. They walked in silence for half a block before Ethan said, Patricia's trying to get you fired, isn't she? Lena's head snapped toward him. What? The incident report, the statement she asked you to provide. That's not standard procedure. That's someone covering their tracks by eliminating potential witnesses. Witnesses to what? To the fact that my own executive team didn't recognize me and tried to have me removed by security. Makes them look incompetent. Makes the company look poorly managed. Easier to get rid of the cleaning woman who saw the whole thing than to admit they screwed up. They passed a small park, empty except for a few pigeons negotiating over a discarded sandwich. Lena was quiet, processing. I need my job, she finally said. My mom's treatment costs more than I make in 6 months, and even with insurance, we're drowning in bills. I can't afford to make waves. I know. How could you possibly know? Ethan stopped walking, looked at her directly. Because I've read your employment file. Single mother household listed as primary caregiver for Rebecca Hart, age 58, oncology patient at Northwestern Memorial. You're working 40 hours a week through a temp agency that's paying you minimum wage with no benefits while charging Orion 3 times that amount for your labor. Lena's face had gone pale. You read my file? After yesterday, I wanted to understand who you were. Why you didn't say anything when you could have. He started walking again, slower this time. Most people in your situation would have used that information, told the executives who I was, maybe earned some goodwill that could translate to better opportunities. You didn't. I didn't think it was my place. Exactly. You have no place according to the corporate hierarchy. You're invisible, disposable. Ethan's voice was flat, which is why I'm offering you a different job. Lena stopped walking entirely. What? I need someone I can trust. Someone who sees problems before they become catastrophic and doesn't have a political agenda that prevents them from speaking up. He turned to face her. You looked at those calculations and knew immediately something was wrong. You didn't understand the math, but you understood the implications. That's a rare skill. I don't have any qualifications. I didn't even finish college. Neither did some of the best engineers I've ever worked with. They learned by doing, by caring enough to understand systems from the ground up. Ethan paused. I'm not offering you an engineering position. I'm offering you a role as my executive assistant. Someone who sits in meetings, tracks projects, asks questions nobody else thinks to ask because they're too worried about looking stupid. I don't know anything about being an executive assistant. Good. The last 3 I had were very qualified and completely useless. They managed my calendar and filtered my emails and made sure I never actually saw the problems that mattered. He pulled out his phone, pulled up a document, handed it to her. This is the offer. Salary, benefits, stock options. Look it over. Think about it. You don't have to decide right now. Lena took the phone with shaking hands, looked at the screen. Her eyes went wide. This is more than 3 times what I make now. It's market rate for the position. The stock options alone are worth... She looked up at him. Why are you doing this? Ethan took his phone back. Because I'm tired of being surrounded by people who only tell me what they think I want to hear. Because the woman who cleans my offices noticed a problem that 6-figure engineers missed. Because you need a job that doesn't force you to choose between rent and your mother's medication. He met her eyes. And because yesterday you had a choice between self-preservation and doing the right thing, and you chose right. I could use more people like that. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Talk to your mom. See if this makes sense for your situation. He started walking again, back toward the building. But decide fast. Patricia's going to try to fire you by the end of the week, and I'd rather poach you first than have to deal with the wrongful termination lawsuit afterward. They walked back in silence. At the main entrance, Lena stopped. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why do you dress like that? Like someone who works in the basement instead of someone who owns the building. Ethan looked down at his canvas pants and work shirt. Because when I dress like a CEO, people treat me like a CEO. They filter everything through what they think I want to hear. When I dress like this, they ignore me. And when people ignore you, you hear the truth. He smiled slightly. Also, these clothes are comfortable. Suits are basically expensive prisons. Lena laughed, surprised. My dad used to say the same thing. Your dad was a smart man. He was. Her smile faded. He died when I was 23, heart attack, no warning. I'm sorry. Yeah. She was quiet for a moment. He would have liked you, I think. He always said the measure of a person wasn't what they had, but what they did with it. Sounds like someone worth knowing. He was. Lena looked at the building, then back at Ethan. Can I ask another question? Ask as many as you want. What happened to your wife? The question landed like a physical blow, unexpected and sharp. Ethan's face must have shown something because Lena immediately backtracked. I'm sorry, that was too personal. I shouldn't have... Car accident, Ethan said quietly. 3 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light. She died on impact. He swallowed. Mason was in the car. He survived without a scratch. Sometimes I think that makes it worse, knowing she saved him and couldn't save herself. I'm so sorry. Me too. Ethan looked up at the building, at the glass and steel that represented everything he'd built, and everything that suddenly felt meaningless when measured against loss. I threw myself into work afterward. Easiest way to not think about it. Bought out my father's partners, restructured the company, expanded into new markets. Made a lot of money and convinced myself that success was the same thing as healing. Is it? No. Simple. Honest. But it's easier than feeling everything all at once. They stood there in the cooling afternoon, two people who'd both learned that life could break you in ways that never fully healed, just scarred over enough to let you keep moving. I should go, Lena finally said. My shift starts soon. Think about the offer. I will. She turned to leave, then stopped. Mr. Calloway? Ethan, please. Ethan, why me? Really? There have to be hundreds of qualified people who'd want this job. Ethan considered the question. Because yesterday, when everyone else in that room was focused on protecting themselves or their positions or their pride, you were focused on whether people might get hurt. You didn't care about the politics or the money or who looked good. You cared about the truth. He paused. That's not something you can teach. Either you have it or you don't. Lena nodded slowly. I'll talk to my mom tonight. Give you an answer tomorrow? Take the time you need. She headed inside and Ethan watched her go, wondering if he'd just made the smartest decision of his career or completely lost his mind. Probably both. His phone rang. Mason's school. Mr. Calloway, this is Principal Winters. We need to talk about the hamster incident. Ethan closed his eyes. How bad? Well, Patches is fine. Traumatized, but fine. However, Mason's improvements to the cage involved what I can only describe as a pulley system, a water recycling mechanism, and something he claims was automated food delivery, but looks suspiciously like a mousetrap duct taped to a paper cup. Despite everything, Ethan felt a laugh building in his chest. Is anyone hurt? Only the class hamster's dignity, and possibly Mrs. Chen's faith in 8-year-old engineering. I'll talk to him. Please do. And perhaps redirect his creative energy toward projects that don't involve live animals and potential Rube Goldberg machines. After hanging up, Ethan sat in the Toyota and let himself laugh. Really laugh, the kind that came from the absurdity of life, trying to save $1 billion contract while his son was apparently attempting to mechanize hamster care. The laughter faded into something quieter. He pulled out his phone and looked at the last photo Sarah had sent him, 3 years and a lifetime ago. Just her smile, Mason on her hip, both of them happy in a moment that would never come again. I'm trying, he said to the empty car. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm trying. The photo didn't answer. Photos never did. But saying it out loud helped somehow, made the trying feel less like failure and more like the only option that made sense. He drove home through rush hour traffic, picked Mason up from after-school care, and listened to an animated explanation of why the hamster cage redesign had been Completely safe, Dad. I ran all the calculations that suggested his son had inherited both his engineering brain and his wife's absolute certainty that she was right, even when she wasn't. You can't test experimental designs on the class pet, Ethan said, trying to sound stern. But how else am I supposed to know if they work? By testing them on something that isn't alive? Mason considered this. That's less fun, though. Most of being responsible is less fun. That's kind of the whole deal. They stopped for pizza on the way home because Ethan didn't have the energy to cook, and Mason had already weaponized the sad eyes technique that usually got him whatever he wanted. The pizza place was crowded, loud, full of families that looked both exactly like them and nothing like them at all. "Dad?" Mason said through a mouthful of pepperoni. "Why did Mom have to die?" The question hit harder than it should have. They'd talked about this before many times, but it never got easier. "I don't know, buddy. Sometimes bad things happen and there's no good reason." "But you're smart. You figure out problems all the time." "Some problems don't have solutions. They just have consequences we have to live with." Mason frowned at his pizza. "I don't like those kinds of problems." "Me neither." "Do you miss her?" "Every day." "Me too." Mason picked at his crust. "Sometimes I can't remember her face anymore. Like, I know what she looks like in pictures, but I can't remember what she looked like when she was just being Mom." Ethan's throat went tight. "That's normal. It happens to everyone eventually." "Does it happen to you?" "Yeah." He reached across the table, squeezed Mason's hand. "But that's why we have the pictures, and the stories, and each other." They finished eating in comfortable silence, then headed home as the city darkened around them. Mason fell asleep in the car, and Ethan carried him upstairs, put him to bed still in his clothes, because some battles weren't worth fighting. He stood in Mason's doorway for a long moment, watching his son sleep, and felt the weight of every decision pressing down. The company, the contract, the offer he'd made to Lena, the constant balancing act of trying to be enough when he'd never feel like enough. His phone buzzed. Text from Lena. "I talked to my mom. She thinks I should take the job. She also thinks you sound too good to be true, which means you're either genuine or a very sophisticated con artist." Ethan smiled and typed back, "Tell your mom I'm definitely genuine. The con artist version would be wearing better clothes." 3 dots. "She says that's exactly what a con artist would say." "Fair point. When can you start?" "I need to give the temp agency notice. 2 weeks?" "Monday. I'll handle the temp agency." Long pause. "Okay. Monday. Thank you, Ethan. You have no idea what this means." But he did. He knew exactly what it meant to be drowning and have someone throw you a rope. Had felt it himself after Sarah died, when his father had shown up and taken Mason for a week and given Ethan space to fall apart without an audience. He typed, "See you Monday. And Lena, your mom's right to be suspicious. In my experience, things that seem too good to be true usually are. But sometimes they're just good. We'll figure out which this is together." He put the phone down and walked to his own room, where the empty side of the bed waited like it always did. He'd stopped putting pillows there, stopped pretending the space wasn't a reminder of absence. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, the emptiness felt less like an ending and more like a question waiting to be answered. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that made Chicago feel like it was auditioning for a noir film. Lena stood outside Orion Dynamics at 7:45, 15 minutes early, because showing up late to your first day at a job that paid 3 times your previous salary felt like tempting fate. She was wearing the nicest outfit she owned, black slacks she'd bought at a thrift store 2 years ago, and a blouse that was only slightly faded from too many wash cycles. Her shoes were the same worn ones from before because she hadn't had time to buy new ones, and anyway, the first paycheck was still 2 weeks away. The security guard at the main entrance looked at her with obvious confusion. "Can I help you?" "I'm starting today, executive assistant to Mr. Calloway." The guard's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. He checked his computer, frowned, checked again. "You're Lena Hart?" "Yes." "Huh. Okay, you'll need a new security badge. The temp one won't work for executive floor access." He handed her a visitor pass. "3rd floor, take a right off the elevator. Someone from HR should be waiting." Someone from HR turned out to be a woman in her mid-40s with perfectly styled hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She introduced herself as Vanessa Chen, no relation to Marcus, she clarified immediately, and led Lena through a maze of corridors that all looked identical. Mr. Calloway's office is at the end of this hall, Vanessa said, her heels clicking against polished floors. You'll have the desk right outside. Phone system is fairly intuitive, calendar management is through Outlook, and there's a procedures manual that should cover most questions. Okay. I have to admit, we were all a bit surprised by this hire. Vanessa's tone was carefully neutral. Mr. Calloway hasn't had an assistant in almost 8 months. We'd assumed he preferred working independently. Lena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They reached a set of glass doors that opened into an area that was somehow both spacious and claustrophobic. The desk Vanessa indicated was massive, made of dark wood that probably cost more than Lena's car. Behind it, through more glass, she could see into Ethan's office. He was already there, on the phone, pacing while he talked. He saw them and raised a hand in greeting. I'll leave you to get settled, Vanessa said. Mr. Calloway has a meeting at 9 with the engineering team. You'll want to familiarize yourself with his calendar before then. After she left, Lena sat at the desk and tried not to feel like an imposter. The computer was already logged in, the calendar open and showing a schedule that made her head spin. Meetings stacked back to back from 9 until 6, with names she didn't recognize and acronyms she'd have to learn. Overwhelming, right? She looked up. Ethan had emerged from his office, looking tired but alert. He was wearing actual business clothes today, slacks and a button-down shirt, though no tie. A compromise between CEO and maintenance guy. A little, Lena admitted. Most of those meetings are pointless. I keep them on the calendar because canceling them causes political drama, but I usually work through them. He leaned against her desk. Your actual job isn't managing my schedule. It's filtering the noise so I can focus on things that matter. How do I know what matters? You'll figure it out faster than you think. He nodded toward his office. Come on, let's talk before the chaos starts. His office was surprisingly sparse. No family photos, no diplomas on the walls, no corporate motivational posters about synergy or innovation. Just a desk, a few chairs, and a whiteboard covered in equations that looked like a different language. Coffee? Ethan asked, gesturing to a machine in the corner that looked like it required an engineering degree to operate. I'm okay. He poured himself a cup and sat in one of the chairs rather than behind his desk. So, here's how this is going to work. I need you to sit in on meetings and take notes. Not just what people say, but what they're not saying. Body language. Who agrees too quickly? Who's avoiding eye contact? The subtext. I'm not sure I know how to do that. Yes, you do. You've been reading rooms your whole life. When you're poor, you have to. You learn to tell the difference between someone who's genuinely trying to help and someone who's setting you up to fail. He took a sip of coffee. That's the skill I need. Everyone else in this building has a degree and an agenda. You just have honest eyes. That's a lot of pressure. It is. And if you want out, now's the time to say so. No judgment, no hard feelings. Lena thought about her mom's medication schedule. The hospital bills stacked on their kitchen table. The way the temp agency supervisor had looked at her like she was replaceable because she was. I want to try, she said. Good. Ethan stood. First meeting is in 20 minutes. Engineering team presenting the revised thermal specifications. Your job is to listen and tell me afterward if you think they actually fixed the problem or just made the numbers look better. I don't understand engineering. Neither do half the people in that meeting. They're just better at pretending. He smiled slightly. Trust your instincts. If something sounds like bullshit, it probably is. The conference room filled up fast. Jennifer Watts arrived first, followed by a man Lena didn't recognize who turned out to be Jerry Bishop, the shift supervisor Ethan had mentioned. Then came a parade of engineers in various states of Monday morning exhaustion, all carrying laptops and coffee and the kind of nervous energy that came from presenting to someone who could fire them. Marcus Chen was noticeably absent. He's on vacation, Jennifer said when Ethan asked. Decided he needed some time to reflect on his career choices. Translation. He's avoiding me, Ethan said. That too. Jerry stood at the front of the room with a laptop connected to the projector. He looked uncomfortable in his button-down shirt, kept tugging at the collar like it was strangling him. Okay, he said, pulling up a slide covered in diagrams. We've completely rebuilt the thermal load calculations using the 2018 IEEE standards as baseline, with additional safety margins for degraded HVAC performance. For the next 45 minutes, Lena watched Jerry walk through calculations she didn't understand, using terms like resistive heating coefficients and ambient temperature variance modeling. The other engineers asked questions, made suggestions, occasionally argued about methodology. But what Lena noticed was how they listened to Jerry. Really listened. Not the polite nodding she'd seen in other meetings, but actual engagement. One of the younger engineers even pulled out a notebook and started sketching something based on Jerry's explanation. When Jerry finished, Ethan asked, "What's your confidence level that this works in sustained extreme conditions?" 95%. We've modeled it against historical data from 15 different installations, including worst-case scenarios from Bagram and Al Udeid. Jerry clicked to a new slide showing temperature graphs. The weakest point is still the junction boxes on the auxiliary systems, but we've added redundancy that should prevent catastrophic failure even if those go down. Should prevent or will prevent? Jerry met his eyes. Will prevent. I staked my reputation on these calculations, sir. They're solid. Ethan looked at the assembled engineers. Anyone see problems? A woman near the back raised her hand. The redundancy adds cost, about 18% over original projections. How much of that is materials versus labor? Mostly materials. The new junction boxes are custom fabrication. Ethan nodded. Build it. If DoD balks at the price increase, I'll handle it. After the meeting dispersed, Ethan and Lena walked back to his office. He waited until the door closed before asking, "What did you think?" About the calculations? I have no idea if they were right. About the people? Lena considered. Jerry believes what he's saying. The others trust him. That woman who asked about cost wasn't trying to kill the project. She was trying to make sure you knew the full picture. Anything concern you? The younger guy in the gray sweater. He kept looking at his phone whenever Jerry talked about the auxiliary systems. Ethan's expression sharpened. You think he knows something? I think he's either bored or nervous. And if he's bored by a presentation that could make or break a billion-dollar contract, that seems wrong. Good catch. Ethan pulled out his phone, typed something. I'll have Jennifer follow up with him. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of meetings that confirmed Ethan's assessment. Most of them were pointless. Budget reviews where everyone agreed to disagree. Status updates that could have been emails. A 40-minute discussion about office coffee quality that made Lena want to scream. But she watched, took notes, started to see the patterns Ethan had mentioned. Around 1 o'clock, her desk phone rang. Lena Hart, she answered, trying to sound professional. Ms. Hart, this is Patricia Simmons from Facilities Management. The voice was cold enough to frost glass. I need to discuss your termination paperwork. Lena's stomach dropped. I don't work for facilities anymore. According to my records, you're still employed through the temp agency. Your contract was through the end of November. Mr. Calloway hired me directly. I'm aware. However, proper procedures weren't followed. The temp agency is owed a placement fee, and until that's resolved, you're technically in breach of contract. Patricia's tone suggested she was enjoying this. I'm afraid you'll need to return to your previous position until this is sorted out. Let me get Mr. Calloway. That won't be necessary. This is a facilities matter, not executive. Lena put her on hold and walked into Ethan's office. He was on his own phone, but he looked up when she entered. Patricia from Facilities, Lena said quietly, says I'm in breach of contract with the temp agency. Ethan's expression went flat. He ended his call without saying goodbye. Put her through. Lena transferred the call and stood there, uncertain whether to leave. Ethan gestured for her to stay. He put the phone on speaker. Patricia, Ethan Calloway, what's this about a breach of contract? Mr. Calloway, Patricia's voice had lost some of its frost. I was just explaining to Ms. Hart that proper procedures weren't followed when she was transferred from temp status. The agency has certain contractual protections, which I'm familiar with, having negotiated the original contract with them. Ethan's voice was pleasant, dangerously so. The placement fee is being handled by legal, should be resolved by end of week. Until then, she needs to return to her previous role to maintain continuity. No, she doesn't. She's my employee now, working at my direction. If the temp agency has issues with that, they can take it up with our legal department. He paused. Is there anything else? Silence. Patricia? No, Mr. Calloway, that's all. Good. And Patricia, if you contact Ms. Hart directly again instead of going through proper channels, we'll be having a different conversation about your understanding of corporate hierarchy. He ended the call and looked at Lena. She's going to make this difficult. Why does she care? I was just a cleaner. You were a witness. And now you're in a position where you might actually have influence. Ethan leaned back in his chair. People like Patricia spend their whole careers building little kingdoms. They see someone like you, someone who went from the bottom to the executive floor in a week, and it terrifies them. Because if I can do it, it means their position isn't as secure as they thought. Exactly. He stood. Don't worry about it. Legal will handle the contract issue, and Patricia will either adapt or find somewhere else to be territorial. But Lena did worry. Had learned from experience that people who felt threatened found ways to make you pay for it later. The afternoon brought the meeting she'd been dreading, Department of Defense contract review. 4 representatives showed up, all in suits that screamed government employee, led by a woman Ethan introduced as Diane Rodriguez. Ms. Hart, Diane said, shaking her hand. I've heard interesting things about you. Nothing bad, I hope. Quite the opposite. Ethan tells me you're the one who first noticed the thermal calculations were off. Lena shot Ethan a look. He just smiled. I didn't understand them, Lena said carefully. I just saw the error note and knew it was important. That's more than most people would have done. Diane turned to Ethan. Shall we? The presentation took 2 hours. Jerry walked through the revised specifications with the kind of methodical precision that came from knowing your work was solid. The DoD representatives asked hard questions, challenged assumptions, requested additional documentation. Through it all, Lena watched Diane Rodriguez, watched how she listened, how she took notes, how she exchanged glances with her colleagues that seemed to communicate entire conversations. When Jerry finished, Diane stood. We'll need 3 days to review the full technical documentation, but preliminarily this looks like exactly what we asked for. Better than what you asked for, Ethan said. The redundancy systems will handle scenarios your original specs didn't account for. At 18% over budget. At 18% over your budget, I'm absorbing the difference. Diane's eyebrows rose. You're eating a cost increase on a $1.2 billion contract? I'm ensuring the systems work correctly. The money's secondary. Mr. Calloway, I've been doing contract review for 15 years. Nobody eats cost increases out of principle. Then I'm nobody. Ethan met her eyes. Those systems are going to installations where people's lives depend on them working correctly. I'm not going to cut corners to protect my profit margin. One of Diane's colleagues leaned over and whispered something. She nodded, then turned back to Ethan. Off the record? This is why we were hoping you'd get this contract. Titan Defense would have fought us on every specification change and tried to pass costs back to us. You're actually trying to build something that works. I'm trying to build something that won't get anyone killed, Ethan corrected. Working is the baseline. Not getting people killed is the goal. After they left, Jennifer Watts practically collapsed into a chair. That went better than expected. It went how it should have gone if we'd done it right the first time, Ethan said. We're not celebrating barely adequate work. Still, Diane seemed impressed. Diane's job is to make sure we're not selling the government garbage. Being impressed that we're not is a pretty low bar. He looked at his watch. Anyone need me for anything urgent? The engineering team exchanged glances. Jerry spoke up. We're good. Need to document some of the questions they raised, but nothing that requires executive sign-off. Good. I'm leaving at 4 to pick up my son from school. Ethan headed for his office, then paused. Lena, you can head out too. First day doesn't need to be a marathon. But Lena stayed. Partly because leaving early felt wrong, partly because she was still trying to process everything that had happened. She answered emails, figured out the phone system, started building a mental map of who reported to whom and which meetings actually mattered. Around 5:30, her phone rang. Mom. Hey, how's the new job? Overwhelming, good, terrifying. Lena lowered her voice even though she was alone. I have no idea what I'm doing. Nobody does on their first day. You'll figure it out. How was treatment? Fine, same as always. Mom's voice was tired. I'm more interested in hearing about this mysterious billionaire who hired you. He's not mysterious, he's just different. Different how? Lena thought about Ethan correcting calculations in an empty conference room, about him offering her a job when he could have just had Patricia fire her quietly, about him absorbing cost increases because he cared more about safety than profit. Different like he actually means what he says, Lena finally answered. It's weird. Mom laughed. That is weird. Rich people usually mean the opposite of what they say. That's what I thought too. They talked for a few more minutes before Mom had to go. Wheel of Fortune was starting, and she had priorities. Lena hung up and sat in the quiet office, watching the city darken through the windows. Her phone buzzed. Text from Ethan. Forgot to mention, there's a company dinner Friday night. DoD reps and key team members. You should come. Lena stared at the message. A company dinner meant the kind of event where people wore expensive clothes and made small talk about things she didn't understand. Meant being around executives who probably resented her sudden elevation. Meant exposure in ways that made her deeply uncomfortable. She typed back, Is that mandatory? Nothing's mandatory, but it would be good for you to meet people in a less formal setting. I don't have anything to wear to that kind of dinner. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Expense it. HR will send you the company card guidelines. Lena looked at her phone like it might explode. Expense clothes? People did that? Another text. And before you argue, consider it a work uniform. You wouldn't question buying steel-toed boots if you worked construction. She smiled despite herself and typed, Pretty sure evening wear and steel-toed boots aren't equivalent. Both serve the same purpose, protecting you while you do your job. Lena sat with that for a moment, then made a decision. Okay, I'll come. Good. Details coming later in the week. She gathered her things and headed for the elevator, mentally calculating how much an appropriate dress might cost, and whether she could find something secondhand that didn't look secondhand. The building was mostly empty now, just a few late workers and the cleaning crew coming on shift. In the lobby, she saw someone she recognized, one of her former co-workers from the temp service, a woman named Marie, who'd always been kind. Lena? Oh my gosh, what are you doing here so late? I work here now, got hired on directly. Marie's eyes went wide. Patricia said you'd been let go for misconduct. Patricia's lying. I figured. She's been on a rampage all week. Fired 2 other people for made-up reasons. Keeps saying the temp workers are getting too comfortable. Marie lowered her voice. She told us you tried to steal confidential documents and got caught. Anger rose hot in Lena's chest. I didn't steal anything. I was offered a better job and took it. I believe you, but she's making sure everyone else thinks you're a criminal. Marie glanced around nervously. Watch your back. Patricia's got connections in HR, and she's not above sabotaging people who cross her. After Marie left, Lena stood in the empty lobby and felt the weight of what she'd gotten herself into. This wasn't just a new job. It was a target on her back, painted there by someone who saw her success as a personal threat. The bus ride home was long and crowded, giving her too much time to think. About Patricia's vendetta. About the company dinner where she'd be surrounded by people who probably thought she didn't belong. About whether she'd made a terrible mistake accepting this job. Mom was asleep when she got home, the TV still on, playing late-night reruns of something. Lena turned it off, covered her with a blanket, and sat in the dark living room of their tiny apartment. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. This is Jennifer Watts. Wanted to welcome you officially to the team. I know today was probably overwhelming, but you did well. Looking forward to working with you. Then another from Jerry Bishop. Ethan mentioned you flagged my junction box concerns before the meeting. Good eye. If you ever want to learn more about the technical side, I'm happy to teach. And finally, one from Ethan. Mason wanted me to tell you that the hamster is doing fine, and his new cage design has been rejected by the school administration. Apparently there are rules about mechanized pet care. Who knew? Lena smiled at that last one, typed back. Tell Mason I'm devastated on his behalf. The hamster doesn't know what it's missing. She went to bed that night feeling less alone than she had in months, even as her brain kept circling back to all the ways this could go wrong. Patricia's lies spreading through the building, the executives deciding she wasn't worth the trouble, making some catastrophic mistake that proved she didn't belong in this world. But when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed about something different, about sitting in meetings and understanding the subtext, about learning systems from people who actually built them, about belonging somewhere that wasn't defined by what she lacked, but by what she could become. The rest of the week passed in a blur of learning curves and small victories. Lena figured out the calendar system, started building relationships with the executive assistants who actually ran everything, and sat in enough meetings to develop a sense for when people were being honest versus when they were performing. Thursday afternoon, she was reviewing Ethan's schedule for the following week when Marcus Chen appeared at her desk. She'd seen him around the building but hadn't spoken to him since that first disastrous encounter. He looked different now, less polished, more uncertain, like someone who'd had the ground shift beneath them and was still finding their balance. "Ms. Hart, do you have a moment?" "Sure." He sat in one of the chairs across from her desk, looked at his hands, then at her. "I owe you an apology." Lena waited. That first day. In the conference room. He trailed off, searching for words. "I was an ass. Treated you like you were invisible, and then, when things went sideways, I blamed you for being there. You didn't know I'd be there. That's not the point. The point is I looked at your clothes and your job and decided you didn't matter. That was wrong." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry." "Okay. That's it? Just okay?" Lena shrugged. "What do you want me to say? You're right. You were an ass. You apologized. I accept it. We move on." Marcus laughed, surprised. "Most people would make me grovel more." "Most people probably have the energy for that. I don't." She turned back to her computer. "Was there something else?" "Yeah. I wanted to ask how you're doing. I know Patricia's been spreading rumors, and some of the executive team has been—" He paused. "Let's say less than welcoming. I'm managing. If you need anything, an ally in meetings, someone to run interference with the political stuff, I'm offering." Lena studied him, trying to figure out if this was genuine or another corporate game she didn't understand yet. "Why?" she finally asked. "Because I spent 8 months as VP thinking I understood this company, and it took Ethan showing up in work clothes for me to realize I didn't understand anything." Marcus stood. "You see things we miss. That's valuable, and I'd rather work with you than against you." After he left, Lena sat for a long moment, processing. The world she'd entered was more complicated than she'd thought. Not just rich versus poor, powerful versus powerless. There were gradations, alliances, people who could surprise you if you gave them the chance. Friday arrived with a kind of nervous energy that came from knowing the evening would be uncomfortable. Lena had found a dress at a consignment shop, dark blue, simple, only slightly out of style. Had borrowed shoes from a neighbor who wore the same size. Felt like a kid playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. The dinner was at a restaurant Lena had only seen in magazine spreads. The kind of place where they didn't list prices on the menu because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. She arrived 10 minutes early and stood outside trying to gather courage. "You look terrified." She turned. Ethan was walking up, wearing a suit that actually fit him properly. Mason was with him, dressed in what looked like miniature formal wear. "Why is your son here?" Lena asked. "Babysitter canceled, and I'm not leaving him home alone." Ethan looked down at Mason. "Besides, he wanted to meet you." Mason stuck out his hand with surprising formality. "Hi, I'm Mason. Dad says you're really smart." Lena shook his hand, smiling despite her nerves. "Hi, Mason. Your dad's being generous. He says you noticed the thermal problem before all the engineers did." "I noticed something was wrong. I didn't understand what." "That still counts." Mason looked up at Ethan. "Can I have soda at dinner?" "1. What if I promise to be really good?" "Still 1. Mason sighed dramatically and headed inside. Ethan and Lena followed, and she was grateful for the distraction, for not having to walk in alone and face a room full of people who probably questioned why she was there. The private dining room was already filling up. Jennifer Watts, Jerry Bishop, several engineers Lena recognized, the DoD representatives including Diane Rodriguez, and scattered throughout, other executives she'd seen in meetings but hadn't officially met. Mason immediately gravitated toward Jerry, asking questions about electrical systems with the kind of enthusiasm only 8-year-olds could sustain. Jerry, to his credit, answered seriously, treating the kid like a colleague rather than a distraction. "Wine?" A server appeared at Lena's elbow with a tray. "Water's fine, thanks." Diane Rodriguez materialized next to her. "First company dinner? That obvious?" "You're standing in the corner like you're planning an escape route. Classic first-timer move." Diane smiled. I did the same thing at my first DoD function. Spent 20 minutes pretending to be very interested in the appetizer selection. Despite herself, Lena relaxed slightly. How long until I can leave without it being weird? Give it an hour. Make conversation with at least 3 people you don't know. Then you've done your social duty. They talked easily after that, Diane sharing stories about contract negotiations gone wrong, about defense contractors who promised the moon and delivered garbage, about the constant battle between what the military needed and what Congress wanted to fund. Ethan's different, Diane said, watching him across the room where he was explaining something to Mason using salt and pepper shakers as props. Most contractors see us as obstacles between them and money. He sees us as the people who have to use the systems he builds. He takes it personally. Very. Which is either going to make him incredibly successful or drive him insane. Diane took a sip of wine. My money's on both. Dinner itself was less painful than Lena expected. She ended up seated between Jerry and one of the younger engineers, both of whom treated her like she belonged there. Conversation flowed around her, technical discussions that went over her head, office gossip she didn't have context for, occasional jokes she pretended to understand. But she watched, took mental notes, started to see the dynamics Ethan had described. Across the table, Mason was asking Diane questions about military installations, his child's curiosity somehow making space for topics adults would have danced around. Do people really get hurt when the systems fail? He asked. The table went quiet. Diane looked at Ethan, who nodded slightly. Yes, she said gently, sometimes they do. That's why we're very careful about what we approve. And that's why Dad fixed the thermal thing, so people don't get hurt. Exactly. Mason thought about this, then turned to Ethan. Is that what you meant about some problems having consequences? Yeah, buddy, that's what I meant. The conversation shifted after that, moving to safer topics. But Lena noticed how people looked at Ethan differently after that exchange, like they'd been reminded of something they'd forgotten. That beneath the contracts and budgets and corporate politics, there were actual human stakes. Around 9 o'clock, Mason started fading, fighting sleep with the determination of a child who didn't want to miss anything. Ethan stood, signaling the evening's end. Thanks everyone for coming. Jerry, excellent work this week. Diane, we'll have those additional documents to you by Monday. He picked up Mason, who immediately curled against his shoulder. See you all next week. Outside, the autumn air was sharp and clean after the restaurant's warmth. Lena stood on the sidewalk, uncertain about the protocol for leaving. You did well tonight, Ethan said. Mason was half asleep on his shoulder, breath evening out. I mostly just listened. That's the skill. Most people talk to hear themselves. You listen to understand. He shifted Mason slightly. You need a ride? My car's in the garage across the street. I'm fine, bus stop's 2 blocks away. Lena, it's 9:30 on a Friday night. Let me drive you home. She wanted to argue, maintain independence, prove she didn't need help, but she was tired and the bus would take 45 minutes and honestly, she'd reached her limit for pride. Okay, thanks. The car turned out to be different than the Toyota, an actual luxury vehicle that probably cost more than 2 years of her old salary. Mason was strapped into a booster seat and back, already completely asleep. They drove through the city in comfortable silence, past buildings lit up like vertical cities, past neighborhoods that shifted from wealthy to working class in the space of a few blocks. Turn left here, Lena said, directing him toward her apartment. Ethan pulled up in front of the building and looked at it without judgment, without the pity she'd learned to expect from people with money. Thank you, Lena said. For tonight, for all of it. You earned it. She got out, then paused with the door still open. Can I ask you something? Always. Why are you really doing this? And don't say it's because I noticed the error or have good instincts. There's something else. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, hands still on the steering wheel. Because 3 years ago, after my wife died, I threw myself into work and convinced myself that success was enough. That if I just built things and made money and expanded the company, eventually I'd feel whole again. He glanced back at Mason sleeping in the car seat. And it didn't work. Success without purpose is just accumulation. I was collecting achievements like they meant something, but I was empty. And hiring me fixes that? No. But maybe remembering that business decisions affect real people helps. Maybe surrounding myself with people who care about more than quarterly earnings makes a difference. He looked at her. You remind me why this matters. Not the money or the contracts or the prestige. The actual work. The systems that keep people safe. That's worth doing. Lena nodded slowly. Okay, I can work with that. Good night, Lena. Good night. She watched him drive away, then climbed the 3 flights to her apartment where Mom was waiting up despite how late it was. How was it? Strange. Good. I think I might actually be able to do this job. Mom smiled. Of course you can. I never doubted it. They sat together in the small living room, Lena sharing edited highlights of the dinner, Mom offering commentary that ranged from proud to skeptical to amused. Eventually, Mom went to bed, and Lena sat alone with her thoughts. Her phone buzzed. Text from Ethan. Mason wanted me to tell you that you seem nice, and also do you know anything about robotics because he has ideas for the next hamster cage iteration. Lena smiled and typed back, Tell Mason I know nothing about robotics, but I'm willing to learn if it means the hamster survives his engineering genius. She went to bed that night feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Not just hope, which was fragile and unreliable, but possibility. The sense that maybe, just maybe, her life was becoming something more than survival. Something that looked almost like building toward a future she might actually want. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the DoD contract had been officially approved. Lena's phone buzzed against her nightstand, dragging her from sleep that had been hard-won after a 14-hour day. Hello? Her voice was rough. Lena, it's Ethan. I need you to get to Northwestern Memorial, now. She sat up, suddenly alert. What happened? It's Mason. He collapsed at home. They think it's his appendix. His voice was steady, but she could hear the fear underneath. I'm in the ambulance with him. Can you meet us there? Of course, I'm leaving now. She threw on clothes without thinking about what matched, grabbed her keys and phone, and ran down 3 flights of stairs to her car, a 15-year-old Honda that started on the 3rd try and sounded like it was dying. The drive to Northwestern took 12 minutes that felt like hours. The emergency room was the usual chaos of middle-of-the-night medical crisis. Lena found Ethan in the waiting area, still wearing pajama pants and a sweatshirt, his hair standing up like he'd been running his hands through it. How is he? They took him back for scans. The doctor thinks it's appendicitis but wants to confirm before surgery. Ethan looked at her, and she saw the same expression she'd seen on her own face in mirrors during her mother's worst days, the helpless terror of watching someone you love hurt and being unable to fix it. Sit down, she said gently. You're going to wear a hole in the floor. He sat, but his leg kept bouncing, nervous energy with nowhere to go. He woke up screaming. I've never heard him scream like that. And I couldn't make it stop, couldn't fix it. You got him here. That's what mattered. What if it's not appendicitis? What if it's something worse? The words came faster now, anxiety breaking through. What if I missed something? He complained about his stomach yesterday, but I thought he'd just eaten too much candy. What if I... Ethan. Lena put her hand on his arm. You're spiraling. Stop. He looked at her hand, then at her face, and took a breath. Sorry, I don't do well with this. Medical stuff. Hospitals. Nobody does well with this. They sat in silence for a while. The ER hummed around them, nurses moving efficiently between rooms, doctors consulting over tablets, someone's baby crying in the distance. The fluorescent lights made everything look slightly unreal, like a movie set built to approximate suffering. You didn't have to come, Ethan said finally. It's the middle of the night. Where else would I be? Home, sleeping, living your own life instead of managing mine. Lena leaned back in the uncomfortable plastic chair. When my dad died, Mom and I were alone at the hospital. His heart attack happened at work, and by the time we got there, he was already gone. We sat in a room exactly like this one, and nobody came. No friends, no family, just us and the hospital chaplain who didn't know what to say. I'm sorry. The point is, I know what it's like to face that alone, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. She looked at him. So yeah, I'm here. Deal with it. Something in his expression shifted. Thank you. A doctor emerged from the back, surgical mask hanging around her neck. Mr. Calloway? Ethan was on his feet instantly. How is he? It's definitely appendicitis. We need to operate soon. It's inflamed but hasn't ruptured yet. The surgery is straightforward, about an hour. He should be home in a day or two. Can I see him before? Absolutely. Follow me. Ethan looked at Lena. Come with me? She followed him through the maze of the ER to a small room where Mason lay on a gurney, looking very small and very young in a hospital gown that was 3 sizes too big. His face was pale, but he managed a weak smile when he saw his father. Hey, Dad. Hey, buddy. Ethan's voice was carefully controlled. How's the pain? They gave me medicine. It's weird. Everything feels floaty. That's the good stuff. Ethan smoothed Mason's hair back. The doctor says they need to do surgery, but it's quick. You'll be back to annoying me in no time. I don't annoy you. You absolutely annoy me. It's one of your best qualities. Mason's eyes drifted to Lena. You came too. Couldn't let your dad wait alone. He gets anxious. He does, Mason agreed seriously. One time I was late coming out of school, and he called the principal. I was 5 minutes early, not late, Ethan protested. You were 10 minutes past dismissal. See? Anxious. The anesthesiologist arrived then, explaining the procedure to Mason in simple terms that didn't talk down to him. Mason listened with the same focused attention he'd given Jerry's engineering explanations, asking questions that made the doctor smile. You're going to be a surgeon when you grow up, aren't you? The doctor said. Maybe. Or an engineer, or both. Mason looked at Ethan. Can you be both? You can be whatever you want, buddy. They wheeled Mason away a few minutes later. Ethan stood in the hallway watching until the gurney disappeared around a corner, then seemed to deflate. Coffee? Lena suggested. The hospital cafeteria was deserted except for a few exhausted-looking residents. They got terrible coffee from a machine that probably hadn't been cleaned since the 90s and sat at a table by the window overlooking the parking lot. I hate this, Ethan said quietly. The waiting, the not knowing, the feeling like everything could fall apart and there's nothing I can do about it. Is this about Mason or about your wife? He looked at her sharply, then away. Both. Neither. I don't know. He took a sip of coffee and grimaced. This is awful. Hospital cafeteria at 3 a.m. What did you expect? Fair point. He set the cup down. When Sarah died, I was at work. Got the call from the police about the accident. By the time I got to the hospital, she was already gone. I didn't get to say goodbye, didn't get to... He trailed off. And Mason was in the ER, and I couldn't fall apart because he needed me. So I just shut it off. Shut everything off and focused on what needed to happen next. That's called survival. That's called avoidance. And now every time something happens with Mason, every fever or fall or stomach ache, I'm right back in that moment, terrified I'm going to lose him too. Lena didn't say anything. Sometimes there weren't words that helped, just presence. They sat in silence, drinking terrible coffee and watching the sky start to lighten outside. Around them, the hospital woke up. Shift changes, breakfast carts, the rhythm of an institution that never really slept. At 4:30, Ethan's phone buzzed. He answered it immediately. Yes? Okay. We'll be right there. He hung up and looked at Lena with visible relief. Surgery went well. He's in recovery. They found Mason in a different room, groggy from anesthesia but awake. He smiled when he saw them, loopy and unfocused. Dad. Lena. They took my appendix out. I know, buddy. How do you feel? Floaty. Everything's floaty. Are you floaty? Not currently, no. You should try it. It's nice. Mason's eyes started to drift closed, then snapped open again. Can I keep the appendix? In a jar? Ethan looked at the nurse, who was trying not to laugh. We don't typically let patients take organs home. But it's mine, Mason protested. I grew it. You also grew your baby teeth and we didn't keep those. We should have. We could have made a necklace. Go to sleep, you menace. Mason's eyes drifted shut, his breathing evening out. Ethan stood there watching him, and Lena saw the tension finally leave his shoulders. You should go home, Ethan said without looking away from Mason. Get some actual sleep. I'm staying here until he's discharged. I'm fine. Lena, you've been here for 3 hours in the middle of the night. You have work tomorrow. Today, technically. So do you. I'm the CEO. I can skip work. You're new enough that it looks bad. She wanted to argue, but he was right. Call me if anything changes. I will. Thank you for coming. It meant more than you know. Lena drove home through early morning traffic, exhausted and wired simultaneously. The city was waking up around her. Delivery trucks, early commuters, the machinery of daily life starting its cycle. She made it back to her apartment just as Mom was getting up. Where were you? Mom asked, alarmed. Hospital. Mason had emergency appendix surgery. Is he okay? Yeah, he's fine. Asking if he can keep his appendix in a jar. Mom smiled. Sounds like a normal 8-year-old. He's definitely that. Lena collapsed on the couch, too tired to make it to her bedroom. Mom covered her with a blanket and let her sleep. And when Lena woke up 4 hours later, there was coffee waiting and Mom sitting in her chair watching one of her shows with the volume low. You like them, Mom said without preamble. Who? That man and his son. You drove to the hospital at 2 a.m. That's not executive assistant duty. That's caring. Lena didn't deny it. He needed someone. And you were someone. That's nice. Mom muted the television. Be careful, though. Of what? Of forgetting the difference between working for someone and being part of their life. Those lines get blurry fast, and when they do, someone usually gets hurt. I'm just doing my job. Honey, your job doesn't include middle-of-the-night hospital visits. You're doing something else, and I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying be aware of it. Lena thought about that on the drive to Orion later that morning, about the line between professional and personal, and whether she'd already crossed it without noticing, about how easy it would be to mistake proximity for something deeper. The office felt strange without Ethan there. Jennifer was running the executive meeting, and without his presence, the dynamic shifted. People were more cautious, less willing to challenge assumptions or admit uncertainty. Lena sat in her usual spot, taking notes and watching. Halfway through a budget presentation, her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Mason's being discharged. Should be home by noon. Thanks again for last night. She typed back, glad he's okay. Take tomorrow off too if you need to. You're not my boss. Someone should be. You're terrible at taking care of yourself. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Point taken. See you Thursday. The rest of the week passed in a strange rhythm. Ethan worked from home while Mason recovered, calling into meetings but largely absent from the daily chaos. Lena found herself fielding questions, making decisions on minor issues, and slowly realizing how much responsibility had quietly shifted onto her shoulders. Thursday morning, Patricia appeared at her desk. Ms. Hart, we need to discuss your parking situation. Lena looked up from her computer. I don't have a parking situation. I don't park here. Exactly. All executive staff are required to use the company garage for security purposes. You've been in violation of policy for 3 weeks. I take the bus. Patricia's smile was sharp. Then you'll need to start parking here. I've arranged for a spot in the executive section. Monthly fee will be deducted from your paycheck. How much? $350. Lena felt her stomach drop. That was nearly a week's worth of her old salary. That's ridiculous. I'll keep taking the bus. That's not an option. Company policy is clear. All executive-level employees must... Patricia, Jennifer Watts had appeared from somewhere, her voice pleasant but with an edge underneath. What are you doing? Simply ensuring Ms. Hart complies with company parking policies. Policies that were implemented for executives who drive luxury vehicles and need secure parking. Not for people who take public transportation. Jennifer turned to Lena. Ignore her. There's no requirement for you to park here. Patricia's face went red. I'm head of facilities management. These policies fall under my jurisdiction. And I'm VP of engineering and sit on the executive committee. Your jurisdiction ends where harassment begins. Jennifer's smile didn't reach her eyes. Is there anything else? After Patricia left, practically vibrating with anger, Jennifer sat on the edge of Lena's desk. She's not going to stop, you know. I'm getting that impression. The trick with people like Patricia is they need small kingdoms to feel important. You represent a threat to her control, someone who went from the bottom to the executive floor without asking her permission. Jennifer paused. Want some advice? Please. Document everything. Every interaction, every policy she tries to enforce, every attempt to undermine you. Build a paper trail. Eventually, she'll cross a line, and when she does, you'll have evidence. That seems exhausting. It is, but so is fighting off constant attacks without ammunition. Jennifer stood. Also, for what it's worth, you're doing good work. The team respects you, which is more than most assistants achieve in their first month. After she left, Lena sat for a moment processing. Then she opened a new document and started recording every interaction she could remember with Patricia, dating back to that first phone call about the temp contract. Her phone rang. Internal line from Ethan's home office. "Hey, how's Mason?" "Driving me insane, which means he's recovering well." She could hear the smile in his voice. "He wants to know if you like pizza." "That's a weird question. He's planning a thank you dinner for coming to the hospital. Apparently pizza is the highest honor he can bestow." Lena laughed. "Tell him I love pizza." Saturday night, 6 o'clock. Fair warning, our apartment is nowhere near as impressive as the restaurant from that company dinner. "I've seen your apartment. It's a penthouse overlooking the entire city. Still, it's not a restaurant. There will be a distinct lack of professional waitstaff and fancy wine lists." "Sounds perfect." After hanging up, Lena sat with the warm feeling of being included in something that felt less like work obligation and more like actual friendship. Then Mom's warning echoed in her head. Be careful of blurring lines. But maybe some lines were meant to blur. Maybe the rigid separation between professional and personal was artificial, a corporate construct that didn't account for actual human connection. Or maybe she was justifying something that would eventually hurt. Saturday arrived cold and gray, threatening snow that Chicago winters love to deliver right when you'd gotten used to just rain. Lena spent an embarrassing amount of time figuring out what to wear to a casual pizza dinner with your boss and his 8-year-old son. She settled on jeans and a sweater that was nice without trying too hard, then immediately second-guessed the choice. Mom watched her change outfits 3 times with increasing amusement. "It's just pizza," Mom said. "I know. With your boss. I know. Who you drove to the hospital at 2 in the morning. Are you making a point?" Mom smiled. "Just observing. You haven't been this nervous about anything since your first day at college." "I'm not nervous. I'm just particular about appropriate dinner attire." "Uh-huh." Lena gave up and went with the original choice. The drive to Ethan's building was short. He lived in one of those downtown towers where the doorman wore a uniform and the lobby looked like a hotel. She gave her name, was directed to the elevators, and rode up to the 28th floor, trying not to feel out of place. Mason answered the door before she could knock. "You came. Dad said you would, but I wasn't sure because adults sometimes cancel plans last minute when they realize they have better things to do." "I don't have better things to do than pizza with you." "See, Dad? I told you she was nice." Mason grabbed her hand and pulled her inside. The penthouse was exactly as she remembered. Huge windows, minimalist furniture, the kind of space that looked designed rather than lived in. Except now there were signs of actual life. Mason's drawings on the refrigerator, books scattered on the coffee table, a blanket fort constructed in what was probably supposed to be a formal sitting area. "Sorry about the fort," Ethan said, emerging from the kitchen. "He's supposed to be taking it easy, but apparently that means building architectural structures out of furniture and bed sheets." "It's not a fort, it's a recovery station," Mason corrected. "The doctor said I need to rest, and this is optimal resting conditions." "Can't argue with medical science," Lena said seriously. They ate pizza on the floor of the living room because Mason had decided the dining table was too formal, and also he wanted to eat in the fort. Ethan went along with it with the patience of someone who'd learned to pick his battles. "So," Mason said through a mouthful of cheese, "Dad says you're really good at your job." "He's being generous." "No, he's not. He told Jennifer you have better instincts than people who've been in business for 20 years. "Mason," Ethan said warningly. "What?" "You did say that. I heard you on the phone." Lena smiled. "Well, tell your dad thank you for the vote of confidence." "You can tell him yourself. He's right there." "Thank you," Lena said to Ethan. "You're welcome." He was trying not to smile. "Though maybe we should establish that conversations you overhear while eavesdropping don't count as official information." "I wasn't eavesdropping. I was in the same room. That's called being present." After pizza, Mason insisted on showing Lena his room, which turned out to be a museum of 8-year-old interests. Model rockets hung from the ceiling, A bookshelf overflowed with everything from picture books to engineering manuals that seemed wildly advanced for his age, and covering one entire wall were drawings, some clearly his own childish attempts, others more sophisticated. Mom drew these, Mason said, pointing to the better ones. Before she died, she was really good at art. Lena looked at the drawings, cityscapes and portraits and abstract designs that showed real talent. These are beautiful. Dad keeps them up even though sometimes I think they make him sad. Mason sat on his bed. Do you think it's okay to keep things that make you sad? The question was so earnest, so genuinely curious, that Lena sat down next to him before answering it. I think it's okay to keep things that remind you of people you love, even if those reminders hurt sometimes. The hurt means the love was real. Mason considered this. That makes sense. He was quiet for a moment. Do you have things like that? From people you lost? I have my dad's watch. It doesn't work anymore, but I keep it in my drawer. Sometimes I hold it and remember what it sounded like when he wore it. That's nice. Sad, but nice. They sat together in the kind of comfortable silence that was rare between adults and children, both of them holding their respective griefs in the gentle way of people who understood loss. When they returned to the living room, Ethan had cleaned up the pizza boxes and was sitting on the couch reading something on his tablet. He looked up and smiled when he saw them. Mason, it's almost bedtime. But Lena's still here, and she'll still be here while you brush your teeth and get ready for bed. Then she can say goodnight before she leaves. Mason grumbled but went, and Lena sat on the other end of the couch, suddenly very aware that they were alone. Thank you for this, Ethan said. He's been talking about it all week. I think you're his new favorite person. He's a good kid. He is. Sometimes I worry I'm screwing him up, raising him alone. He should have a mother, should have siblings, should have a normal family instead of just me and my work obsession. He has a father who loves him and shows up for him. That's more than a lot of kids get. Ethan looked at her. You always do that. Do what? Say the thing that makes the anxiety quiet down. Like you can see the spiral starting and just redirect it. Years of practice with my mom. When you're a caregiver, you learn to recognize when someone's disappearing into their own head. Is that what you're doing with me? Caregiving? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to examine. I don't know, Lena said honestly. I'm not sure what this is. The job, the friendship, whatever we're calling it, the lines are blurry. Would it help if I made them clearer? I don't know if I want them clearer. Before Ethan could respond, Mason reappeared in pajamas covered in planets and stars. He hugged Lena goodnight with the unselfconscious affection of a child who hadn't learned yet to guard his heart. Will you come back? He asked. If your dad invites me. Consider yourself invited, Ethan said. Standing invitation for Saturday pizza, whenever you're free. After Mason went to bed, Ethan walked Lena to the door. They stood in the entryway, neither quite ready for her to leave. I meant what I said, Ethan told her, about the lines being blurry. I don't know what this is either, but I know I look forward to seeing you every day. I know Mason talks about you constantly. I know that when I got scared at the hospital, you were the person I called. Ethan, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. So there's no confusion about where I stand. Lena looked at him. This man who'd gone from stranger to boss to something else in the space of 6 weeks, who'd given her a chance when she had nothing but determination and survival instincts, who looked at her like she mattered, not despite where she'd come from, but including all of it. I should go, she said quietly. Okay. But neither of them moved. The moment stretched, full of possibility and fear, and the weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade once you made them. Finally, Lena stepped back. See you Monday. See you Monday. She made it to the elevator before letting out the breath she'd been holding. The ride down felt longer than the ride up, giving her too much time to think about blurred lines and standing invitations, and the way Ethan had looked at her like she was someone worth keeping around. Mom was still awake when she got home, waiting up despite the late hour. How was pizza? Good. Complicated. I don't know. Did something happen? No. Maybe. He said he didn't know what we were, but he knows he looks forward to seeing me. Lena sat on the couch next to her mother. What am I doing, Mom? Sounds like you're falling for him. That's a terrible idea. I hate. Most good things start as terrible ideas. Mom took her hand. Question is, are you falling for him or for the life he represents? The security, the stability, the escape from everything we've been struggling with? Lena thought about that. About Ethan kneeling beside electrical panels, correcting calculations nobody else saw. About him at the hospital, terrified and trying not to show it. About the way he listened to his son's wild ideas about hamster cages like they were serious engineering proposals. I don't know, she admitted. How do you tell the difference? You ask yourself if you'd want him if he lost everything tomorrow. If he was back to being that guy in coveralls that nobody recognized, would you still look forward to seeing him every day? The answer came easier than Lena expected. Yes. Then maybe it's real. Mom squeezed her hand. Just be careful. Rich men who say they're different usually aren't. And even if he is, that doesn't mean it'll work. Sometimes love isn't enough when the gap between your worlds is too wide. Lena went to bed that night thinking about gaps and bridges and whether some distances were too far to cross even when both people were trying. She dreamed about standing on opposite sides of a river, watching Ethan on the far bank, but unable to hear what he was saying over the rush of water between them. She woke up Monday morning with the dream still lingering and a text from Ethan already waiting. Mason drew you a thank you picture. It involves pizza and what I think is supposed to be a portrait of you, but might also be an alien. Hard to tell. Lena smiled and typed back, I look forward to seeing it, and for the record, I look great as an alien. She got ready for work with Mom's warning still echoing in her head, but also with the quiet certainty that whatever this was, blurry lines, terrible ideas, gaps too wide to cross, she was already in it too deep to back out now. The confrontation with Patricia came on a Wednesday in late November, exactly 2 months after Lena had started at Orion Dynamics. Lena was reviewing contract amendments in the conference room when Patricia walked in with 2 security guards and a woman from HR that Lena had never met. Ms. Hart, we need you to come with us, Patricia said, her voice carrying the particular satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. Lena looked up from her laptop. I'm in the middle of something. Can this wait? No, it can't. There's been a serious breach of confidential information, and you're the primary suspect. The words landed like a punch. Lena stood slowly, aware that everyone in the nearby offices could probably hear this. Excuse me? Confidential DoD contract details were leaked to a competitor. The leak was traced to an email sent from your computer. Patricia nodded to the security guards. We need to secure your workstation and escort you from the building while HR investigates. Lena's mind raced. She hadn't leaked anything, hadn't even accessed the full contract details. Her clearance level didn't allow it. This was a setup, and a clumsy one, but that didn't matter if people believed it. I want to talk to Ethan. Mr. Calloway has been informed and agrees this needs to be investigated thoroughly. Patricia's smile was razor thin. Company policy requires immediate suspension pending the outcome. One of the security guards, the same young guy who'd been called to remove Ethan that first day, looked uncomfortable. Ms. Hart, if you'll just come with us, we can sort this out quickly. Lena gathered her things, her hand steadier than she felt. She'd documented everything like Jennifer suggested, but documentation didn't mean much when you were being perp-walked out of your own office. They were halfway to the elevator when Ethan's voice cut through the hallway. What the hell is going on? Everyone stopped. Ethan was walking toward them with the kind of controlled fury that made the air feel charged. Mr. Calloway, Patricia started, as I explained in my email, there's been a security breach. I didn't get any email. Try again. Patricia's confidence flickered. I sent it 20 minutes ago. Perhaps it went to spam? Or perhaps you didn't send it because this is a setup and you didn't want me involved until after you'd already removed Lena from the building. Ethan looked at the HR rep. Sandra, what evidence do you have? Sandra shifted uncomfortably. Patricia brought me an IT report showing an email with classified contract details sent from Ms. Hart's computer to an external address associated with Titan Defense Systems. Let me see it. I don't have it with me. Then get it, right now. Ethan turned to the security guards. Stand down. Nobody's going anywhere until I see actual evidence. Patricia's face had gone red. With all due respect, Mr. Calloway, this is a facilities and security matter. Protocol requires that you don't railroad my assistant without evidence or due process. He pulled out his phone. Jennifer, I need you in the north hallway. Now. And bring someone from IT. 2 minutes later, Jennifer arrived with a woman Lena recognized as the head of IT security. Ethan explained the situation in clipped sentences while Patricia tried to maintain control of a narrative that was rapidly getting away from her. Can you pull up the email in question? Ethan asked the IT director. The woman, her badge said Maria Chen, apparently everyone was a Chen, opened her laptop and typed for a moment. Her frown deepened. There's an email sent from an account associated with Lena Hart's login credentials. Sent yesterday at 11:47 p.m. to an external address. She turned the screen around. But there's a problem. What problem? Patricia demanded. The metadata shows the email was sent from an IP address in Building C, Server Room 3. Lena's security badge shows she left the building at 6:15 p.m. yesterday and didn't return. Maria looked at Patricia. Unless she can teleport, she didn't send this email. The hallway went silent. Someone used her login credentials, Maria continued, from a terminal that requires facilities-level access to enter. She paused meaningfully. Patricia, you have master access to that server room, don't you? Patricia's face had gone from red to white. I didn't. This is ridiculous. Why would I frame her? That's an excellent question, Ethan said quietly. Sandra, I think we need to expand this investigation. Maria, pull all access logs for that server room for the past week. Jennifer, contact legal. Patricia, you're suspended pending review. And before you protest, that's not a request. Patricia opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked toward the elevator with the kind of rigid dignity people used when they knew they were finished. After she was gone, Ethan turned to Lena. Are you okay? I'm angry, and honestly kind of impressed at how stupid that setup was. Using her own access credentials to frame me? That's amateur hour. Desperation makes people careless. He looked at Sandra. I want a full report by end of day, and I want recommendations for how we prevent this kind of abuse of access privileges going forward. The crowd dispersed, leaving Ethan and Lena alone in the hallway. He looked exhausted. I'm sorry, he said. I should have seen this coming, should have dealt with Patricia weeks ago instead of letting her harassment continue. You can't predict crazy. I can predict that people who feel threatened do dangerous things. He ran a hand through his hair. Come on, let's get coffee somewhere that isn't this building. They ended up at a small cafe 3 blocks away, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and baristas who looked like they wrote poetry in their spare time. Ethan ordered something complicated while Lena stuck with plain coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of burnt despair. She's going to be fired, Ethan said once they were seated. Maria already found evidence Patricia's been accessing confidential files she had no business reading. The email setup was just the most obvious violation. How long has she been doing it? Months? Maybe longer. He took a sip of his drink and made a face. I ordered the wrong thing. This tastes like someone dissolved a candy bar in espresso. Want to trade? You'd do that, knowing my drink is terrible? I've had worse. Lena slid her cup across the table. And you look like you need normal coffee more than I do. They switched drinks, and Ethan smiled for the first time that day. Thank you for not falling apart back there. Most people would have panicked. Most people haven't spent years dealing with poverty and medical bureaucracy. You learn to stay calm when institutions are trying to destroy you. She took a sip of his terrible candy espresso. This is actually awful. I know, but you're drinking it anyway. Someone has to. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the cafe fill up with the lunch crowd. Students with laptops, business people having meetings, a couple arguing quietly in the corner about something that sounded like relationship drama. Can I ask you something? Lena said finally. Always. That first day in the conference room. You could have just told them who you were immediately, could have pulled rank and made them listen. Why didn't you? Ethan thought about it. Because I wanted to see if the work would speak for itself. If the calculations and the logic would be enough without my name attached. He looked out the window. My whole life, people have treated me differently because of who I am. My father's son, a billionaire, the CEO. I wanted one moment where someone listened because I was right, not because I was powerful. That's naive, probably, but I was tired of being surrounded by people who only told me what they thought I wanted to hear. The calculations were correct. That should have been enough. Except that's not how the world works. Being right doesn't matter if nobody's listening. I know that now. He met her eyes. But you listened. You didn't know who I was, didn't have any reason to trust me, but you looked at those calculations and knew something was wrong. That meant something. It meant I can read context clues, not engineering specs. It meant you cared about truth more than politics. That's rare. Lena's phone buzzed. Text from Mom. Doctor called. Scan results are back. Can you come home? Her stomach dropped. Scan results were never good news delivered via text summons. I have to go, she said, already standing. My mom, there's a medical thing. Ethan was on his feet immediately. Do you need a ride? Want me to come with you? No, She paused. Actually, yes, if you're offering. They drove in Ethan's car, the Toyota, instead of the luxury one, and Lena was grateful for the familiar rattles and the cracked windshield that made it feel less like accepting charity and more like catching a ride from a friend. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table when they arrived, a cup of tea cooling in front of her untouched. She looked small in a way that terrified Lena more than any scan results could. Hi, honey, I didn't know you were bringing company. This is Ethan, my boss. He drove me. Lena sat down. What did the doctor say? Mom looked at Ethan, then at Lena. The cancer's progressing, faster than expected. Dr. Morrison wants to try a more aggressive treatment, but insurance won't cover it without prior authorization, and that takes weeks we might not have. The words hung in the small kitchen like smoke. Lena felt her chest tighten, felt the familiar panic of watching someone you love slip away while bureaucracy moved at its glacial pace. How much does the treatment cost? Ethan asked quietly. Mom blinked at him. I'm sorry? Without insurance, if you paid out of pocket, how much? That's not relevant. We can't afford, $85,000 for the full course, Lena said flatly. She'd already looked it up, already done the math that didn't work no matter how many times she recalculated. Plus hospital stays and additional medications. Call it $100,000 total. Ethan pulled out his phone. What's your doctor's name? Dr. Sarah Morrison at Northwestern, Mom said, confused. But I don't understand. Give me 10 minutes. He stepped into the living room, phone already to his ear. Lena and her mom sat in silence, listening to Ethan's half of the conversation. Professional, efficient, asking questions about treatment protocols and success rates like he was negotiating a contract instead of someone's life. He came back 5 minutes later. Dr. Morrison is expecting a call from Northwestern's billing department within the hour. The treatment's approved and paid for. She wants to start as soon as possible, preferably tomorrow if you can make it. Mom stared at him. You can't just... That's $100,000. It's money. You need treatment. The math isn't complicated. I can't accept that. I don't even know you. You raised Lena. That's enough. Ethan looked at Lena. I'm overstepping. Tell me if I'm overstepping. Lena's throat was too tight to speak. She nodded, not trusting her voice. I'll pay you back, Mom said. It might take years, but There's nothing to pay back. Consider it a signing bonus for Lena. She's been underpaid for weeks anyway. Ethan headed toward the door, giving them space. I'll wait in the car. Take your time. After he left, Mom grabbed Lena's hand. That man just paid for my cancer treatment like it was a cup of coffee. I know. That's not normal, Lena. People don't do that. He does, apparently. Mom's eyes were wet. You're in love with him. Mom, don't argue. I can see it. And I think he's in love with you too, though he probably hasn't admitted it to himself yet. She squeezed Lena's hand. Just be careful. When someone saves you like this, it's easy to confuse gratitude with love. It's not gratitude. Then what is it? Lena thought about Ethan in the hospital, terrified for Mason, about him correcting calculations in an empty conference room because getting it right mattered more than looking important, about the way he'd asked if he was overstepping, giving her the power to refuse even when they both knew she wouldn't. It's recognizing someone, she said finally, seeing who they actually are instead of who they're supposed to be, and being seen the same way back. Mom smiled through her tears. That's either the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, or you're both in trouble. Probably both. They talked logistics after that, treatment schedules, transportation, who would stay with Mom during the rough days when chemo hit hardest. Lena found Ethan sitting in his car, scrolling through emails like he hadn't just casually dropped $100,000 on a stranger's medical care. "Thank you," she said, getting in the passenger seat. "I don't know how to. There aren't words for. You don't need words. You need your mom healthy." He put his phone down. "And before you spiral about power dynamics or obligation or whatever your brain is already doing, this isn't about you owing me anything. This is about having resources and using them for something that actually matters. Most rich people don't think like that. Most rich people are idiots." He started the car. "Back to work, or do you need the rest of the day?" "Work. I need normal right now." They drove back in silence, but it was different than before. Heavier, full of things neither of them was saying, but both of them felt. The next 3 weeks blurred together. Mom started treatment, and the side effects were brutal. Exhaustion, nausea, days where she couldn't get out of bed. Lena split her time between work and caretaking, running on coffee and determination, and the occasional sandwich Ethan would leave on her desk when he noticed she'd forgotten to eat. Patricia was fired after the investigation confirmed she'd been systematically accessing confidential information and selling it to competitors for months. The email frame-up had been her desperate attempt to get rid of Lena before her other crimes came to light. She left the building escorted by actual police, which felt like justice, even though it didn't fix the damage she'd done. The DoD contract officially launched in early December. Jerry's thermal systems worked flawlessly in testing, and preliminary installation reports from the first military bases showed performance exceeding expectations. Ethan barely reacted to the news, treating success like it was baseline rather than celebration-worthy. "You should be happy," Lena told him after a particularly dry "congratulations, we did the thing" meeting. "This is a huge win. It's what we were supposed to do. I don't celebrate not killing people through negligence." "You're impossible." "I've been told." Mason's school winter concert fell on a Thursday. Ethan invited Lena without preamble. "Mason's singing in the concert. He'll be devastated if you're not there. 7 p.m., school auditorium. Prepare for enthusiastic mediocrity." Lena went, sitting next to Ethan in uncomfortable folding chairs while third graders massacred jingle bells with the kind of conviction that made up for complete lack of pitch control. Mason saw her in the audience and waved so enthusiastically he nearly fell off the risers. Afterward, Mason ran up to them, still wearing his concert outfit, a bow tie that was crooked and a shirt that had somehow acquired a stain despite 45 minutes of standing still. "Did you see me? I was the loudest one in the back row." "We noticed," Ethan said, trying not to smile. "Was I good?" "You were enthusiastic." "That's not the same thing." "No, but it's better." They got ice cream despite the December cold, because Mason insisted celebrating required ice cream. And who were they to argue with that logic? Sitting in a booth at a diner that had definitely seen better decades, watching Mason explain his elaborate plans for a Christmas present involving engineering principles and probably some duct tape, Lena felt something settle in her chest. This felt like family. Messy and imperfect and nothing like the glossy magazine version, but real in a way that mattered more. "Lena's coming for Christmas, right?" Mason asked suddenly. Ethan looked at her. "I was going to ask. I know you need to be with your mom, but if she's feeling okay, you're both welcome. No pressure, just the offer's there. Can I let you know? Mom's next treatment is the 23rd, and I don't know how she'll be feeling." Of course. But when Lena asked Mom about it later that night, she got an answer she wasn't expecting. "You should go. I'm not leaving you alone on Christmas." "I won't be alone. Mrs. Chen from downstairs already invited me for dinner. She makes excellent dumplings." Mom was having a good day, sitting up in bed with actual color in her cheeks. "You should be with them." "Mom, honey, you've been taking care of me for 2 years. You've put your entire life on hold. Go be young. Go be with people who make you smile like you've been smiling lately." She paused. "Go be with him." "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that. And it's okay. You're allowed to be happy even while I'm sick." "I feel guilty." "I know. But guilt isn't going to cure my cancer, and it's definitely not going to make your life better." Mom took her hand. "I'm proud of you. Your dad would be proud of you. Go have Christmas with your billionaire and his son, and let yourself be part of something good." So, Alina found herself on Christmas morning in Ethan's penthouse, watching Mason destroy wrapping paper with the efficiency of someone who had been planning his attack strategy for weeks. The pile of presents was modest by billionaire standards: books, art supplies, a build-your-own robot kit that Ethan was definitely going to regret. "This is from Lena," Ethan said, handing Mason a package. Mason tore it open and pulled out a book, a collection of real engineering disasters, written for kids but not talking down to them. His face lit up. "This is perfect. Look, Dad, there's a whole chapter on bridge failures." "Every 8-year-old's dream," Ethan said dryly. After presents, they made breakfast together, or tried to. Mason's idea of helping involved mostly eating ingredients and asking questions about structural integrity of pancakes. They ate in the living room with terrible Christmas music playing and snow falling outside the windows, coating Chicago in white that would turn to gray slush by afternoon, but looked beautiful for now. "I got you something too," Ethan said to Lena after Mason had wandered off to build robots. He handed her a small box. Inside was a key. "What's this?" "Office key, executive suite access." He looked almost nervous. "I know you have building access already, but this is different. This means you're not just my assistant anymore. You're my partner in this. Someone I trust to make decisions when I'm not there, to see the problems I miss, to tell me when I'm wrong." Lena turned the key over in her hand. It was just metal, just access, but it represented something bigger. "Ethan, I don't have an MBA. I don't have any formal business training. I'm still learning. You have something more valuable than training. You have judgment. You see systems and people and problems clearly because you're not invested in maintaining comfortable illusions." He took her hand. "I need that. The company needs that. And I'm hoping you'll stay." "Of course I'm staying. Where else would I go?" "Anywhere. You could work anywhere now. You have experience, recommendations, skills people pay for." He was still holding her hand. "But I'm asking you to stay here, with me." The weight of what he wasn't saying hung between them. This wasn't about business anymore. "Ethan, I know this is complicated. I'm your boss, you work for me, power dynamics are messy, but I can't keep pretending that's all this is." He looked at her directly. "I think about you constantly. When you're not there, I'm waiting for you to arrive. When you are there, I'm finding excuses to talk to you. Mason asks about you every night, and I don't know what to do with any of that except be honest about it." "I'm scared," Lena said quietly. "I'm scared this is temporary, that eventually you'll realize I don't belong in your world, and I'll be back to scraping by. I'm scared of needing you, of losing myself in this." "Then don't lose yourself. Keep being exactly who you are. The person who notices problems, who asks questions, who doesn't let me get away with avoiding hard truths." He squeezed her hand. "And for what it's worth, I'm scared too. Scared I'll screw this up like I screw up everything that isn't work. Scared I'm too broken from losing Sarah to be good for anyone. Scared Mason will get attached, and then something will go wrong, and he'll lose another person he loves. So we're both terrified." "Apparently. That's not very romantic." "No, but it's honest." Ethan smiled slightly. "And I think honesty might be more important than romance." Mason's voice floated from his room. "Dad! Lena! The robot's arm fell off, and I need engineering consultation." They looked at each other and started laughing, the tension breaking. "We should probably help him before he decides to solve it with duct tape," Lena said. "Too late. I heard duct tape being deployed 30 seconds ago." They found Mason in his room, surrounded by robot parts, and what appeared to be half a roll of tape. He'd somehow attached the arm backwards and was very proud of his innovative design choice. They spent the rest of Christmas Day fixing robots, making dinner together, watching movies that Mason picked based on their explosion-to-dialogue ratio. It was messy and chaotic, and nothing like the polished perfection Lena had imagined billionaire Christmases to be. It was better. That night, after Mason had fallen asleep on the couch halfway through the third movie, Ethan and Lena sat in the kitchen drinking hot chocolate and talking about everything and nothing. "Thank you," Lena said, "for all of this. For my mom's treatment, for the job, for letting me be part of your family." "You are part of my family. Have been for a while now." Ethan set down his mug. "And I need to say this clearly so there's no confusion. I'm in love with you. Probably have been since you stood in that conference room and didn't tell them who I was, even though it would have been easier for you. Definitely since the hospital when you showed up at 2 in the morning because I needed someone and you were someone. I know the timing's complicated and the situation's messy, but I need you to know. Lena felt tears threatening. I'm in love with you too, and I'm terrified of it, but I'm more terrified of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what if. So we try? We try? Ethan leaned across the table and kissed her, gentle and uncertain and perfect in its imperfection. When they pulled apart, Lena was smiling. Mason's going to be insufferable about this, isn't he? Absolutely. He's been campaigning for us to be together like people in movies for weeks. Smart kid. Takes after his mother. They cleaned up the kitchen together, moving around each other in the easy rhythm of people learning to share space. Mason woke up enough to be carried to bed, mumbling something about robot armies and Christmas miracles. Lena left around midnight, Ethan walking her to her car despite the cold. Drive safe, text me when you're home. I'm 30 years old. I know how to get home safely. Humor me anyway. She texted him from her apartment. Made it. Mom wants full details tomorrow. Prepare to be analyzed. His response came immediately. Looking forward to it. Mason wants to know if you can come to his science fair next month. Something about needing someone who understands the importance of proper documentation. Tell him yes. I wouldn't miss it. Mom was still awake, reading in bed with her new medication within reach. How was it? Perfect. Messy. We're together now, or trying to be. Good. Mom set down her book. You deserve this, honey. You deserve to be happy. Even though it's complicated? Especially because it's complicated. Easy things aren't usually worth having. 3 months later, Mom's scans came back clear. Not cured, cancer was never really gone, but in remission. Stable. A word that felt like winning the lottery when you'd been preparing for worst-case scenarios. They celebrated at the same diner where they'd had ice cream after Mason's concert, because Mason insisted it was lucky, and who were they to argue with that logic? To my girls, Ethan toasted with a milkshake glass. To family, Mom countered. To robots that don't fall apart, Mason added, which made no sense but got included anyway. Lena looked around the table, at her mother who was getting her color back, at Mason who was explaining his latest engineering scheme with wild hand gestures, at Ethan who was watching both of them with quiet contentment, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just happiness, which was fleeting and unreliable. Not just relief, though there was plenty of that, but belonging. The sense that she'd found her place in a world that had spent years telling her she didn't have one. Work at Orion had shifted too. With Patricia gone and Lena officially promoted to VP of Strategic Operations, a title Ethan had created specifically for her unique skill set, the company culture started changing. More transparency, more listening to people who actually did the work, less tolerance for politics over competence. Jerry Bishop was now Director of Field Operations, leading installation teams and training new engineers in the practical realities of systems that had to work in impossible conditions. Jennifer Watts had softened considerably, becoming something like a friend. Even Marcus Chen had found his footing, channeling his competitive energy into actually improving processes instead of protecting territory. The second military contract came in ahead of schedule, and this time the presentation went smoothly because everyone involved actually understood the systems they were selling. We should celebrate, Jennifer said after the DoD reps left. It's just doing our jobs correctly, Ethan protested, which is exactly why we should celebrate. 6 months ago, we were almost presenting a system that could have killed people. Now we're setting new standards for the industry. She looked at him. Take the win, Ethan. So they celebrated. Small dinner with the core team, no speeches or formal toasts, just people who'd worked hard together acknowledging that the work mattered. Driving home that night, Ethan reached over and took Lena's hand. I've been thinking, he said. Dangerous. Mason needs a better school, somewhere that challenges him but doesn't just accelerate him into being a miserable teenager. And your mom shouldn't be living in that apartment anymore, especially during recovery. Ethan, hear me out. There's a house. North Side, good neighborhood, excellent schools. It's big enough for all of us without feeling like a museum. Has a yard where Mason could build things without me worrying about him falling off the balcony. Has a first-floor bedroom for your mom so she doesn't have to deal with stairs. Lena looked at him. Are you asking me to move in with you? I'm asking if you'd want to build something together. Actual together. Not you in your apartment, and me in my penthouse, and us pretending that's sustainable. He glanced at her. Too fast? Probably, but fast seems to be how we do everything. She squeezed his hand. Can I see the house first? Obviously, I'm not asking you to commit to something sight unseen. I'm not a monster. The house was perfect in the way real things were perfect. Slightly imperfect, but exactly right. Big enough for privacy, but small enough to feel like home. A kitchen where they could all cook together. A yard where Mason could pursue his increasingly elaborate engineering projects without violating lease agreements. Mom loved it immediately, though she tried to hide it. It's too much. It's enough, Lena corrected. For the first time in our lives, we get to have enough. They moved in over spring break, Mason directing the movers like a tiny foreman with very specific ideas about furniture placement. The first night, they ordered pizza and ate on the floor of the living room because the dining table hadn't arrived yet. This is weird, Mason announced. Bad weird? Ethan asked. Good weird, like we're actually a family now instead of just people who care about each other. He looked at Lena. Are you going to marry my dad? Lena choked on her pizza. Ethan went red. Mason, Ethan said warningly. What? It's a reasonable question. You look at her like she's important. She looks at you like you're less annoying than most people. That's basically marriage. That's definitely not how marriage works, Lena managed. But you're thinking about it, right? Ethan and Lena looked at each other. They hadn't talked about it explicitly, but it hung there in every decision they made, every plan that included plural pronouns instead of singular. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. We're thinking about it. Good. I want a brother or sister, but I'll settle for just having you around permanently. Mason went back to his pizza like he hadn't just casually orchestrated their entire future. Later that night, after Mason and Mom had gone to bed, Lena and Ethan sat on the back porch watching the city lights in the distance. He's not wrong, you know, Ethan said, about us getting married. We've been together for 6 months. We've been building toward this for longer than that. Since that first day in the conference room, probably. He took her hand. I'm not proposing right now, not officially, but I'm saying that's where this is heading, and if that terrifies you, now's the time to speak up. It does terrify me. All of it. The commitment, the permanence, the idea that I could have this and then lose it. Lena leaned against him. But I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. So yes, eventually, when you actually propose properly, I'll say yes. Even knowing I'm a workaholic who's terrible at emotions and comes with a son who wants to engineer everything, including his own life. Especially because of that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars that were barely visible through Chicago's light pollution, but were there if you looked hard enough. A year later, Ethan proposed on a Tuesday. No grand gesture, no elaborate planning, just the two of them at home after Mason had gone to bed, doing dishes together like they did every night. Marry me, he said, not a question, but a statement. Yes, Lena said, not surprised, but happy anyway. I have a ring. It's upstairs. I was planning a whole thing, but then I realized the whole thing didn't matter, just this mattered. Show me the ring later, kiss me now. So he did. They got married in the backyard 6 months later. Small ceremony, close friends and family. Mason as the ring bearer who took his job so seriously he practiced walking up the aisle for weeks. Mom cried through the entire thing, healthy enough to be there but still fragile in ways that reminded them all how precious this was. Jerry Bishop gave a toast about thermal load distributions and life partnerships both requiring proper engineering, which made no sense to most people, but made Ethan laugh harder than Lena had ever seen. Jennifer caught the bouquet and immediately tried to give it back, insisting she was not interested in relationship symbolism, but kept it anyway. Standing in their backyard with Ethan's hand in hers and Mason dancing with her mother and their friends scattered across the lawn, Lena thought about the distance she'd traveled, from cleaning offices to running operations, from scraping by to having enough, from survival to actually living. What are you thinking? Ethan asked. That a year ago I was terrified of needing anyone, and now I can't imagine not needing you. That's growth, or codependency. Probably both. He pulled her closer. Want to dance? I don't know how. Neither do I. Let's be terrible at it together. They danced badly in their own backyard while Mason provided commentary on their structural instability, and Mom took pictures that would come out blurry but perfect anyway. Later, after everyone had left and Mason had finally crashed from the sugar high that comes from eating your weight in wedding cake, Lena and Ethan sat on the porch in the same spot where he'd non-proposed a year earlier. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, Lena admitted, for something to go wrong and prove this was too good to be real. Things will go wrong, they always do, but wrong doesn't mean over. Ethan looked at her. We'll fight. I'll work too much. You'll get frustrated with my avoidance of emotions. Mason will become a teenager and hate us both. Your mom's cancer might come back. The company will have crises. Life is just a series of things going wrong. This is possibly the worst pep talk ever. I'm not done. The point is, things going wrong doesn't change the fundamental fact that we're building something real, something that can bend without breaking. That's what matters. When did you get wise? I married someone smart. It's rubbing off. They sat in the dark, holding hands and watching the city breathe beneath them. And Lena thought about foundation and structure and how the strongest systems were built by people who understood that perfection wasn't the goal. Resilience was. 5 years later, Mason was 13 and insufferable about it. Mom's cancer had come back once and gone into remission again. Orion Dynamics had tripled in size. Lena had a daughter named Sarah who was 2 and already showed signs of inheriting her father's engineering brain and her mother's ability to read people. Life wasn't perfect. They fought about work-life balance and whose turn it was to deal with Mason's increasingly complex school projects, and whether installing a robotics lab in the basement was necessary or absolutely going to result in property damage. But it was theirs. Built from nothing by people who'd learned that the most valuable things couldn't be calculated or controlled, only lived. On a random Thursday, Lena found herself back in the building where it had all started, walking through the halls she used to clean. Orion had expanded into the entire floor now, but they'd kept Conference Room B exactly as it was. She stood in the doorway, remembering the day she'd found Ethan correcting calculations, and felt the weight of everything that had happened since. Thought I'd find you here. Ethan appeared beside her, carrying Sarah, who was babbling about something only she understood. Just thinking about how weird life is. How one random moment can change everything. It wasn't random. You made a choice to pay attention, to care about something that wasn't your responsibility. He shifted Sarah to his other hip. That's not random. That's character. Still, if I hadn't walked into that room that day, then I would have found another way to notice you. Or you would have found another path forward, or we would have missed each other entirely and lived different lives. He took her hand. But we didn't. We found each other, and everything that came after was us choosing to keep finding each other every single day. That's almost romantic. I'm trying. Sarah grabbed Lena's face with sticky hands. Mama, home? Yeah, baby, let's go home. They walked out of the building together, past the desk where Lena used to clock in, and the service corridor where she'd first talked to Ethan, and the elevator that had carried them both up and down through all the iterations of their lives. In the car, Mason was waiting, headphones on, and working on something on his laptop that probably violated several laws of physics. He looked up when they got in. Finally, I'm starving. Can we get Chinese food? We had Chinese food yesterday, Ethan said. Your point? My point is we should have some dietary variety. Counterpoint, Chinese food is delicious and variety is overrated. They argued about dinner the whole drive home, Sarah chiming in with enthusiastic nonsense, and Lena felt the same sense of belonging she'd felt that first Christmas. The certainty that she'd found her people, messy and imperfect and exactly right. That night, after the kids were in bed and the kitchen was cleaned, and Mom had gone to her room with a book she probably wouldn't read because she'd fall asleep in 5 minutes, Lena and Ethan sat in their living room just being quiet together. I love you, Ethan said. Not for the first time, not for the last time, just because it was true. I love you too, Lena answered. Same reason. And in that moment, in that house they'd built together, filled with people they'd chosen, and who'd chosen them back, Lena understood something she'd been too scared to believe for most of her life, that happiness wasn't something you found or earned or achieved. It was something you built day by day, choice by choice, with people who saw you completely and loved you anyway. The billionaire nobody had recognized, and the poor woman who'd noticed him had created something neither of them could have built alone. Not a fairy tale ending where everything was perfect, but something better. A real life, full of problems and solutions, and love that was strong enough to hold them all.